Chapter 904. The arrival of Tang En, Lina, and other strong reinforcements, as well as the Tiger Roar Army's transfer token, documents, and so on, was like a pie falling from the sky. It undoubtedly brought a huge surprise to Josiah's side. What followed was naturally the hustle and bustle caused by this. The opportunity was fleeting. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Skinny Monkey immediately hurried out of the city with the token and documents. Josiah led Lina, David, and the others to settle down. At the same time, he arranged new identities for a few of them, probably personnel of a secret organization, and introduced them to the higher-ups of the Grey Coat Army here. As for Tang En behind the city lord's mansion, Tang En was led by the middle-aged officer who had previously passed on the message. They passed through a few long corridors and arrived in front of a single tightly guarded compartment. Soft carpet, exquisite wall lamps, and a thick red and brown wooden door that was expensive to make. Tang En roughly glanced around and knew that this should be the place where the city lord used to rest during work. Or perhaps it was a secret place where he and his assistants and subordinates delved into the great business of making babies. Of course, now that this place was occupied by the Grey Coat Army, there was naturally no such mess. However, what had not changed was that the person who lived here now was also a big shot. A big shot who played an important role in the Grey Coat Army. This could be seen from the elite guards who were full of spirit and vigor guarding the surroundings. At first glance, one could tell that they were veterans of hundreds of battles. The atmosphere here was somewhat inexplicably cold and oppressive. When one got closer, the entire corridor was like an ice cellar, cold and gloomy. The middle-aged officer stepped forward and whispered a few words to a guard. The latter glanced at Tang En, nodded, and reached out to gently push open the wooden door behind him. The marshal has just eaten something and hasn't gone to bed yet. You can go in. However, the doctor said to rest more, so you'd better come out quickly. Of course, this guard knew this middle-aged officer and should also know that this meeting was the idea of Chief Josiah. However, his words were still cold, as if he was not very willing to see Tang En visit. Tang En didn't get angry. He nodded at the guard, took a deep breath, and walked into the room. As soon as he entered, before he could even take a look at the luxurious interior of the house, a strong smell of medicine assaulted his nose. Tang En frowned slightly and looked at the wide bed on the left side of the wall. He looked at the thin figure leaning against the headboard. It was an old man with a head full of white hair. His eyes were slightly closed, and his face, which was covered with age spots, was ashen. It was obvious that he was seriously ill or heavily injured, and was on the verge of death. But even so, from that seemingly weak reclining posture and the forceful straightening of his back, one could still feel an iron-blooded aura. Frey's identity was a marshal, but now outsiders still called him General Fry. In today's Grey Coat Army, there was only one person who could be called a marshal, and that was old Marshal O Meng. This former general of the brand's regular army was brought to the Grey Coat Army by Losha, and he had always held the power in the army. 4 decades, he led the weak Grey Coat Army soldiers to run around and fought for thousands of miles. In the Grey Coat Army, his status and meritorious service was second only to Losha. It was just a pity that since ancient times, famous generals were like beauties, and they were not allowed to see each other. Looking at old Marshal O Meng, who had a heroic laugh and a burly figure, lying weakly like a withered tree in the wind, Tang En couldn't help but shake his head sadly. His eyelids drooped slightly, and he was secretly sad. In just a year, how many of the old men of the Grey Coat Army were left now? As if sensing something, O Meng, who was lying on his side, frowned slightly and slowly opened his drooping eyelids. His old eyes were cloudy, and he looked at Tang En blankly at first, then suddenly understood. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he laughed softly. "Ha ha, you're finally here!" Tang En also laughed softly when he heard this. He was not surprised. He took a few steps forward to the bedside and bowed. "I'm sorry, old Marshal, I'm late. Of course, Tang En's disguise was not a problem, but with O Meng's current physical condition, there were not many people who came to visit him. This was not heartless, but what O Meng needed the most now was a quiet rest. In addition, now that the war had started, there were fewer people from the military, so there were naturally fewer people who came to visit. Now that an extremely unfamiliar face like Tang En had appeared, it was expected that O Meng would be able to guess his identity. No, you came at the right time. Cough cough. O Meng waved his hand slightly and straightened his body, as if he wanted to sit higher and more comfortably. However, the moment he moved, his old body trembled and he coughed repeatedly. When Tang En saw this, he quickly went forward to support O Meng. He gently patted O Meng's thin back to help him breathe. Phew. I'm fine. I'm really old and useless. In the past, even if I was pierced through, I could drink 2 bottles of wine to replenish my blood. Sigh, forget it, let's not talk about it. O Meng shook his head, and his white hair was like withered grass. He laughed self-deprecatingly. I keep mentioning the past. Looks like I'm really going to meet those old brothers of mine. Tang En shook his head seriously. Old Marshal, what are you talking about? With your physique, you only need to rest for a few days, and you can still be a rich man walking dogs and birds in the future. These were not all words of comfort. Although illness came like a landslide, it went away like silk. However, the main reason why O Meng had become like this was mainly because of the harsh environment in the depths of the 100,000 mountains. There was a lack of effective medicine, so his injuries were even more serious. Now that he had entered the city of Bran, there was no lack of various treatment methods and medicine. As long as his vitality was not affected, it was still possible to stabilize his condition and injuries. Haha, I'm not used to this. After all, I've spent most of my life on horseback. O Meng laughed. He did not seem to care about his injuries. He only mentioned it briefly and did not say anything more. Instead, he grabbed Tang En's hand and said solemnly, I know a little about the current situation of the Grey Coat Army. This is not fair to you. Leader Luosa's matter can't be blamed on you. Don't think too much about it. Old Marshal, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Tang En nodded and said as he patted the back of O Meng's cold hand. Tang En did not care, but it was obvious that O Meng did not think so. He waved his hand and continued, let me finish. In the depths of the 100,000 mountains, Josiah and I discussed this matter. Although it's a little tricky, it's not impossible to turn it around. With Josiah and my reputation in the Grey Coat Army, plus your ability, it's not difficult to let the people of the Grey Coat Army know your role and meaning. It's just that these arrangements need time. We can't let you take the blame for no reason. Again, this is not fair. As he rambled on, Tang En nodded and listened. He did not interrupt, but his expression was a little thoughtful. Sure enough, after a while, O Meng subconsciously grabbed Tang En's hand tightly. He looked a little hesitant. It's best if you don't mind, but if you do, please forgive me. Haha, some things sound very utilitarian, but there's really no other way now. This is also the reason why this old man has been at death's door for so long. After a pause, he raised his head and met Tang En's gaze. He said calmly, Tang En, you must know the situation of the Grey Coat Army. The decision to come out of the 100,000 mountains was a risky one. It's hard to say whether it will succeed or not. However, the biggest problem now is Josiah's safety. I hope you can be Zhuo Fan for once. Tang En nodded when he heard this. He understood that this was what O Meng really wanted to say after going around in circles. Although he was bedridden, O Meng's mind was still very clear. He knew very well where the fatal weakness of the Grey Coat Army was. Once Josiah, the new leader, made a mistake, the Grey Coat Army that had just climbed out of the abyss of despair would collapse. Zhuo Fan had already passed away with Rosa. Now, he could only place his hopes on Tang En. Being Zhuo Fan for once actually meant being Zhuo Fan for a lifetime. This was because the hidden meaning behind this was to let Josiah be the leader of the Gray Coat Army forever. This was also the reason why Meng had begged. He was very clear about the relationship between Tang En and Josiah. Therefore, it seemed like it was reasonable for Tang En to protect Josiah. However, in reality, Tang En and Josiah were not Swafan and Rosa. Let's not talk about whether it would be too much to tie Tang En to the Gray Coat Army forever, this war chariot that could topple at any time. Let's talk about whether Tang En was willing to let his lover, Josiah, be the leader of the Gray Coat Army forever. This was a big problem. One had to know that Swafan had also wanted Rosa to leave the Gray Coat Army and find a quiet and peaceful place to enjoy the two of them. He didn't want Rosa to carry the name of a rebel and lead tens of millions of people to run around pathetically, living a precarious life. Most people were selfish, especially when it came to the safety of their loved ones. Rosa was able to abandon his own feelings and selflessly devote himself to the masses. Now, Josiah was also able to do this. However, in the long journey of life, Meng couldn't guarantee that Josiah would always be like this, and he couldn't guarantee that Tang En would be like this too. In short, as Meng had said earlier, this was a very utilitarian request. It was also very selfish. But Meng shook his head. I'm not Brother Tang En. Josiah is also not the leader of Rosa. Looking at Meng's dim eyes, Tang En smiled slightly and said calmly, "She is my woman. So, for her safety I will protect. Her wishes I will satisfy. As for what will happen in the future, no one can say for sure. I can only guarantee one thing, as long as she says so, as long as I can." Tang En paused for a moment. Also, looking at the corner of Meng's mouth that had cracked open and suddenly become radiant with vigor, Tang En shrugged. Telling the biggest wish in your heart before dying with a smile is too cliché. It's like acting in a play, and I don't like it. So, you have to live, and then come to my and Josiah's wedding wine. He suddenly laughed like thunder. Haha. Don't worry, kid. With my physique, even if I'm pierced through now, I'll just treat it as 2 bottles of wine. A moment later, you should rest first. I'll come and see you when I'm free. Haha. You don't mean what you say. Scram, as long as you have the heart. If you have time, you should spend more time with Jo, your woman. Tsk, how disrespectful. Waving his hand, Tang En pursed his lips and closed the wooden door. He turned around. What did you talk about? It's the first time I've seen the old marshal so happy recently. Josiah, who was still wearing his heavy armor, stood quietly in front of the door. He raised his eyebrows and asked. The large group of guards beside him also looked at Tang En with surprise. Oh, it's nothing, just a casual chat. Tilting his head and thinking, Tang En looked at the curious Josiah and rubbed his nose. You really want to know? Alright, let's talk while we walk. Alright, go ahead. Josiah followed him. Actually, it's really nothing. When I went in, I saw the old marshal lying on the bed listlessly. I asked him if he drank water. He shook his head. Did he eat fruits? He still shook his head. In the end, I could only say, why don't I find a girl for you? Tsk. The old marshal was immediately happy when he heard that. He laughed until tears flowed down his face. He grabbed my hand tightly and said, "Help me up." Smacking his lips, Tang En shrugged innocently. That's the whole thing. Hee, since you're so disrespectful, don't blame me for stabbing you in the back. Sigh, revenge breeds revenge, when will it ever end? His footsteps suddenly stopped. Josiah's mouth opened into a cute O shape. He stared blankly and was immediately dumbfounded. Then, clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal hitting the ground suddenly rang out and echoed clearly in the long corridor. Tang En and Josiah turned their heads instinctively and saw the large group of cold elite soldiers in front of the door. They froze on the spot like statues. Their expressions changed constantly, like they were about to collapse. Their outstretched palms trembled slightly. There was a pile of shiny spears and weapons beside their feet. Chapter 906. At noon, after lunch, at the entrance of the city lord's mansion. What, you can't blame me for this. Isn't it good to be old but vigorous? Don't you think that white hair against red makeup, a pear blossom against a begonia, this scene is so lovely? Sigh, I've never seen anything like this before. I have to study harder and broaden my horizons, comrade Little Chiao. You're still talking. I'll bite you to death. I'll really bite you. Calm down, I'm just kidding. Hee hee, well, let's take advantage of the good weather and go shopping. On the steps at the entrance, Tang En gestured with his hands and stepped back, avoiding Josiah's relentless pursuit with a smile on his face. In the midst of the banter, he decisively used his trump card and pointed at Josiah's heavy armor, changing the topic. But then again, are you planning to go shopping with me dressed like this? Please, others will think that I'm the master and you're the guard. Women always cared about their clothes and makeup, not to mention that a woman would dress up for her lover. Josiah glared at Tang En, and as expected, her attention was diverted. She looked down at the heavy armor on her body and said hesitantly, "How about I go and change?" Of course. Other than the warrior-type women, no woman would like to wear this heavy armor all day long, and Josiah was no exception, not to mention that she was a mage with a weak physique. The reason why she was hesitating now was because of her own safety. She was not being narcissistic and boastful, but she knew how important she was to the Grey Coat Army today, and absolutely no mistakes could be made. And regarding this point, Tang En naturally understood as well. He stepped forward and took off Josiah's helmet, and her golden brown hair immediately slid down like silk, bright and beautiful, stunning beyond compare. After a pause, he said, "Go and change into beautiful clothes, don't wear this armor in the future." Reaching out to stroke the strands of hair in front of Josiah's eyes, Tang En said faintly, I'm here, even if the whole world is my enemy, who can hurt you?" Although he didn't say it clearly, Josiah could naturally understand the meaning behind his word. Qing Shui's eyes immediately lit up and sparkled. This was not Tang En bragging. With his current strength, unless Wu Ding came in person, he was not worried at all. This was not looking down on the heroes of the world, but confidence in his own strength. Moreover, even if he couldn't win, if he wanted to escape with Josiah, even if Wu Ding came, he might not be able to catch up with him. I know, but... Tang En's gaze was indifferent, but Josiah seemed to have seen the scorching light of noon. His eyelids drooped subconsciously, and there was a rare shyness in his eyes. It's just that it's not easy for us to meet each other. I don't want to be disturbed. Such worries were not groundless. Although Josiah wasn't as well informed as Tang En and knew that the Brand Palace had already put her wanted poster on top of all the guilds, replacing Losha's position, it wasn't hard to guess. However, this was not hard to guess. She believed that as long as she casually walked around, even in Shanghai City, which was now occupied by the Grey Army, there would still be many assassins who would jump out to kill her. This was also the reason why she always wore the heavy armor after leaving the 100,000 mountains and never took it off. Don't, I came this time to wait for these guests to disturb us. Tang En waved his hand and laughed. Moreover, isn't it a little boring to just walk around? It's not bad to have some fun. This was the truth. Tang En wasn't Zhuofan. Their personalities were different. Compared to Zhuofan's silent protection, Tang En preferred to take the initiative to attack and nip the danger in the bud. Apart from that, there was another important reason, which was Wu Ding. Tang En wasn't sure if Wu Ding would rush over in anger after knowing that the battle energy circulation channel had reappeared. Hence, he didn't have much time to waste on these greedy assassins. He had to deal with them as soon as possible. Of course, Tang En wouldn't say this. It was meaningless and would only increase the pressure on Josiah. Josiah didn't ask any more questions. This was the trust between the two of them. He nodded. Okay, I'll go change my clothes. As the main camp of the Gray Coat Army, Shanghai City was undoubtedly the best base for the Gray Coat Army out of all the cities that had been occupied. The reputation that they had accumulated over the years, in addition to the fact that they didn't harm the people after entering the city, and the strict punishment of the rich and heartless nobles, made the people of Shanghai City put down the stone in their hearts. Although it was impossible for the city to return to its former prosperity, the situation was undoubtedly improving. The shops in the city were open for business as usual. Of course, the people were still a little wary of those conspicuous targets. For example, on the streets, a man and a woman in casual clothes were casually strolling around. They would occasionally point at the shop signs and laugh. Occasionally, they would go in to take a look. It could be said that if it weren't for the dozens of fully armed and vigilant guards behind them, they would be a normal man and woman strolling on the streets. Father and daughter. But now, TSK, they really have the aura of a tyrant strolling on the street. Everywhere they go, there's chaos. Looking at the magnificent scene of the crowd parting, wherever they went like a waterfall, Tang En held his waist and sighed with emotion. When Josiah heard that, he rolled his eyes and frowned. Why don't we let Victor and the others go back first? Victor was the middle-aged military officer in charge of guarding the city lord's mansion. When Josiah went out, he brought dozens of elite guards to protect him. That uncle? Forget it. Tang En touched his nose. Since I kidnapped you until now, he hated that he couldn't stare me to death. If we let them go back, I'm afraid they will come and fight me to the death. The security of the city lord's mansion was pretty good. Only a pervert like Twain could enter unguarded places. It would not be easy for an ordinary assassin to get close and sneak in. Therefore, Josiah's safety was undoubtedly guaranteed by staying there. But now, Tang En openly invited Josiah out to this open street. He even persuaded Josiah to change out of the heavy but strong armor. It could be said that if it weren't for Josiah's insistence, Victor really wanted to take down this guy who looked like a spy. So, naturally, he couldn't be nice to Tang En. Josiah subconsciously turned his head and looked at Victor, who had his hand on the hilt of his sword. Sure enough, he saw the latter looking at the back of Tang En's head with resentment. He couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. I'm just kidding. Tang En waved his hand to stop Josiah's intention to disperse the crowd. He looked around at the streets that were not congested or deserted. He squinted and said, "Originally, we came here to alert the enemy. With them here, we can attract some uninvited guests. And we may need their help later." Help? Josiah was a little surprised when he heard this. He didn't think that Victor and the others could help in a situation that even Tang En couldn't handle. It's just a small matter, such as moving some drunk guests or something. Someone has to deal with the aftermath. Tang En replied casually. He seemed to have discovered something. The corners of his mouth raised slightly, and he smiled faintly. Josiah raised his eyebrows when he saw this. "You're here?" "I've been here for a long time." He nodded without any nervous or surprised expression. He just sighed softly, and his tone was a little regretful. "I thought I could play for a while." "Don't worry, just play as much as you want." Tang En shrugged in an extremely relaxed manner. Assassination is a dangerous craft. If they don't understand the situation and don't have a good opportunity, they won't do it. Pause for a while. He turned his head to look at the auntie who was carrying a vegetable basket a few feet away. He asked with a smile, "Don't you think so?" After a pause, Josiah subconsciously glanced over. In the bustling crowd, he saw the auntie's expression suddenly change. Her body shook slightly, and she quickly passed through the crowd with a speed that didn't match her age and identity. She rushed into the alley beside the street and disappeared without a trace in an instant. All this movement was completed in the blink of an eye. Except for a few pedestrians who were pushed aside and looked stunned, it didn't cause any commotion. Looking at Josiah's gaze, Tang En spread his hands innocently. We're all in the same line of work. Let's exchange ideas. TSK, she's too excited. She's playing around. Chapter 907. The little interlude sent Victor, who had sensed that something was amiss, away. Tang En and Joshua walked along the main commercial road and continued to chat as they strolled forward. Tang, your temper seems to be getting better and better. Haha, now that I'm an expert, of course I have to have the demeanor of an expert. I can't afford to lose face by competing with some ordinary small fries. Tang En stroked his hair and put on the look of an expert who was the loneliest and most infuriating. Is that so? Josiah blinked. Are you sure it's not because you have tender feelings for the fairer sex? Damn. Tang En's arm paused. He opened his mouth and stared blankly. His image as an expert instantly collapsed. Then he touched his forehead and said, Comrade Xiao Qiao, you can ignore my character, but you can't insult my taste. Although the assassin just now was disguised, her actual age and identity was that of an ant. Don't you know my taste? That's a bit too much. Of course, this was just a joke. After that, Tang En explained, people die for money, birds die for food. Such assassins are like carps crossing the river, there's no end to killing them. The best situation is to kill a few fierce characters, scare off most of the small characters, and finally carry out a collective cleanup. Well, if everything goes well, the situation will be much better. Killing the chicken to warn the monkey, this was Tang En's plan. There was nothing novel about it, but it was fast and the cycle was short. Nodding gently, Josiah suddenly looked a little lost, as if he didn't care about these things, but also as if he had absolute confidence in Tang En. His eyelids drooped, and he said abruptly, But my temper seems to be getting worse. Maybe it's not as simple as my temper, but my nature is constantly changing, or the ugly things are constantly being exposed. Stretching out his palm, it was white and jade under the light. Josiah smiled and laughed at himself. Believe it, these hands and this mouth, as long as I move a little, countless people will die, regardless of good or bad, loyal or evil, regardless of whether they are willing or not. Tang En tilted his head and thought, and said seriously, This is war. Some are not. Shaking his head slightly, Josiah pointed at the city in front of him, and said calmly, For example, a few days ago, in order to stabilize the situation as soon as possible, I ordered no prisoners after entering the city. Anyone who hides the brand soldiers is also guilty. Killing captives is war, but what about the civilians who provided hiding places for brand soldiers? You should know that most of the garrison soldiers' homes are in this city. As such, the parents will naturally hide their sons, and the wives will naturally hide their husbands. But there's no other way. What can we do? We've already given the order. If we take it back, we'll be chilling the hearts of our soldiers. We can only kill, keep killing. Taking a deep breath and holding Tang En's hand, Josiah looked up, blinked, and asked, Tang, do you think this is war? Tang En did not answer. In fact, he did not need to answer. Tang En believed that Josiah would be able to figure out the relationship between the two. No matter how bad it was, he could choose to forget and ignore it. This was not cold-bloodedness, but the necessary rationality of a leader. The only reason he brought it up now was because of his own existence. The 7 emotions and 6 desires were human nature. The stronger one was in front of outsiders. The more defenseless or even weak one would be in front of acquaintances. This was self-regulation and balance. Therefore, Tang En only tightened his grip on Josiah's hand and listened quietly. Sure enough, a moment later. Look at me. We're obviously out shopping, but now we're talking about such a boring thing. Josiah took a deep breath and shrugged. He smiled apologetically, as if he was just casually talking about it. It's okay, Tang En naturally would not expose him. He looked around, pointed to a tall statue in the distance, and changed the topic. I'm a little curious. How did you deal with those frauds? Did you kill them all? What? Oh, the church. Of course, we didn't kill them all. Josiah looked up at the towering statue of the god of light in the distance and smiled slyly. You know, those frauds are the best trauma healers. Of course, they were all exiled. I understand. Recycling trash. Ha, that's right. And that statue, we wanted to get rid of it immediately after we entered the city, but to take care of the feelings of the citizens in the city, we kept it first. Let me tell you a secret. We plan to destroy it in the name of Brand Deserter in a few days, so that it won't be an eyesore, ha. The grudge between the Greycoat Army and the Temple of Light was huge. Now that they had a chance to take revenge, they would naturally find a way to return the favor. This was also the reason why Tang En did not find trouble with the Temple of Light after he killed his way into the Holy Light City. He knew that after the Greycoat Army came out, they would definitely completely eliminate the foundation of the Temple of Light. This was much more effective than killing some people. After chatting for a while, Josiah quickly adjusted his mood. When he looked up, he happened to arrive in front of a large clothing store with 3 storefronts. He glanced over and saw a variety of women's clothing hung or displayed. The colors were colorful and dazzling. It looked very tempting to go in and spend money, especially women. Looking up at the shop sign, Josiah nodded in understanding. No wonder. It's Von Karen Women's Clothing Store. Tang En naturally did not know much about women's clothing, but as an assassin who needed to know a little about everything, he also knew that Von Karen was one of the top women's clothing brands in this world. He spread his hands and said, "Let's go in and take a look." There were women in the modern world who liked to torture their wallets through shopping sprees to vent their emotions. Tang En decided to copy this and use it on Josiah to see the effect. Okay. Josiah did not refuse. He nodded and walked in with Tang En. After the guards at the back divided up the work, Victor followed in with a few people. The interior of the store was very big, and the decorations were very exquisite and elegant. There was even a piano player in the corner. The music was soothing and pleasant, and the atmosphere was very good. However, relatively speaking, there were not many customers here. A few young waiters who were free gathered at the side of the door and chatted about something. It seemed a little quiet and deserted. Seeing Tang En and Josiah walk in, a waitress walked over with a professional smile. However, when she saw Victor and the others in full armor quickly walking up from behind, she immediately stopped in her tracks. A look of hesitation and fear flashed across her face. In the current Shanghai city, only the Greycoat Army could wear armor. Although the Greycoat Army's performance was not bad after entering the city, to the normal citizens, it was naturally best to stay away from them if they could. Tang En saw this and waved his hand. "I'll call you if I need you." The waitress heard this and immediately let out a sigh of relief. She bowed and quickly retreated to the side. Just now, the waiters seemed to be talking about the Greycoat Army. Now that the main characters had come in, they naturally shut up. All of a sudden, only the soothing music could be heard in the store, which added to the elegant and quiet atmosphere. However, although the environment was quiet, the eye-catching Victor and the others were like sharks that charged into shallow water. When some of the customers saw them, their faces changed, and a few of them hurriedly left. Those who could afford to spend money here were naturally wealthy and respectable people. And in the current city, the people who were most afraid of the Greycoat Army were these people. Not to mention the distant ones, just the signboards that invited the people to vote to judge the evil nobles were still erected on the street. Luckily, the store was big enough. Josiah and Tang En were only moving around at the side and did not disturb all the customers. Otherwise, the store owner and the waitress would be depressed. Tang En and Josiah had seen this kind of situation many times along the way, so they naturally did not care. However, Josiah would buy something every time he entered the store as a form of compensation. This time was no exception. How about this? Josiah picked up a simple and stylish black cotton top and turned around to ask. Tang En was not in a hurry to answer. Instead, he raised his brows and asked, "You seem to only like pure colors? I see that most of your clothes are like this." He tilted his head and thought about it. "Really? And maybe it's because I've worn too many magic robes. Why, this one doesn't look good? How can it be? It's very beautiful." Tang En did not hesitate to give a thumbs up. Some people were born to be clothes hangers, such as Josiah. It was just that she used to wear a long robe, which covered up her slim figure. Now, her concept seemed to have changed, from long robes and long skirts to simple clothes. She was less naive and more mature. Really? Women had always been weak to praise, especially when it came from the person they liked. Josiah was no exception. Although her tone was questioning, her slightly narrowed smiling eyes still revealed her happy mood. Of course. Tang En touched his chin and looked up and down again. But the size of this shirt seems to be a little small, and it still lacks a pair of matching pants. And waitress? He raised his hand and snapped his fingers, calling the waitress who had been waiting for a long time. After knowing the problem, the young waitress respectfully replied, "Honorable customer, please rest assured. Our store has a complete range of sizes for all types of clothing. Even if there is a shortage, we can urgently transfer them from other places to meet all your need. As for matching pants, if you don't mind, I can ask the resident designer to give you a suggestion." Tang En nodded with satisfaction. "Thank you, then that's it. Try on a bigger shirt first, and then ask the designer. By the way, the changing room here. Please follow me." After all, it was a high-end store. The changing room was naturally not just a curtain, but a long row of cubicles at the back of the store. It looked very imposing. At this time, there were already a few men waiting here. Obviously, there were female companions changing inside. But women, of course, would not change quickly, so these men could only gather together and chat casually. However, when they saw Tang En and the others, especially Victor and the others, they suddenly stopped talking. Their faces changed greatly, and they stepped back. If it were not for the presence of their female companions, they would have chosen to leave immediately. Victor glanced around like a hawk, and could not help but frown. After all, this was the changing room for women. It was naturally inappropriate to check one by one. And if there were people inside, he could not go in. But if he did not check, it would be even more unacceptable. In short, it was all that damn guy's fault. Victor glared at Tang En again. He put on a stern face and was about to go in and check one by one. But at this time, Josiah shook his head, obviously indicating that they should not get close. After a slight hesitation, Victor was about to continue to insist, but the waitress had already changed into a bigger shirt. Tang En saw this and casually pushed open a cubicle. He roughly glanced around. The space was neither big nor small. There was a long mirror and a seat. It was obvious at a glance. That was all. He bowed and waved his hand in an inviting gesture. "Please, beautiful lady." Hee. Josiah walked into the cubicle with the clothes, turned around, smiled at Tang En, and closed the wooden door. "Sir, if you don't have any other requests, I will ask the designer to come over now, no rush." Tang En waved his hand and said calmly, "You just said that this place can meet all the needs of the customers." "Yes, as long as there is a need for clothing." He shook his head. "It has nothing to do with clothes, but you should be able to do it. Well, this piano player is good. Can I order a song?" Tang En raised his index finger and circled it around his ear, indicating the soothing piano tune, and asked. "Ah." The waitress was taken aback. Obviously, she did not expect such a request. After she reacted, her expression was a little strange, and she nodded. "Of course, which song is it?" "Thank you, I'll order Death Sonata. Here, this is your tip." "Okay, thank." The waitress's hand that took the tip paused in midair. She looked up blankly and looked at Tang En's indifferent expression. She blinked in disbelief. I'm sorry, I may have misheard. Which song did you just say? Death Sonata, thank you. Chapter 908. Victor was in a bad mood now, not only because his job as a guard was out of control, but also because leader Josiah didn't seem to trust him. Of course, the latter couldn't be blamed on the leader, but on the guy who came out of nowhere. He must have instigated him. Nilahong. What a stupid name. The name was weird, and the person was also unknown. From the way he communicated with the leader, this person should have a close relationship with the leader. He might be a relative like an uncle. Well, looking at this relationship, Victor originally intended to respect him. But everything had to be prioritized. What time was it now? How could he casually bring the leader out for a stroll? How could he guarantee his safety? What if an accident happened? Could he really be a spy? The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. After taking a slight breath, Victor decisively made a vigilant gesture to his subordinates scattered around. Then, he frowned and walked toward the strange guy. He decided to risk offending the leader to go forward and check. Before he got close, Victor was stunned as Nilahong waved his hand and sent the waiter away. He walked to the door of another cubicle and got closer. He narrowed his eyes and twitched his nose, as if he was enjoying it very much. F***ck. Outside the female changing room, a middle-aged man with white sideburns was posing as if he was almost sticking to the door. This scene, anyone who saw it would definitely misunderstand. Victor's feet paused as he looked at this scene in shock. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He felt that he had underestimated this guy's bottom line. It was hard to say whether he was a spy or not, but he was definitely a wretched uncle. In contrast to Victor's shock, the few men who had retreated to the side were instantly furious. After all, the one changing in the cubicle was their female companion. Some of the impulsive ones had already clenched their fists and walked over. But at this moment, knock, knock, knock. 3 unhurried and polite knocks on the door. Reaching out, a wooden door of a cubicle opened. You really King pushed a man. Victor and the other men subconsciously looked past Nilahong and saw a tall woman with blonde hair and a red dress in the cubicle. She covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Ah!" Bang, they entered in a flash and the wooden door closed. The sound insulation of the changing room was good, and the exclamations were immediately reduced. Silence. The few people present looked at each other. They were all at a loss. Soon after, they discovered that the other party did not take any further action. From this, they knew that the woman in the cubicle did not seem to be the female companion of the person present. Lover, mistress, or third party. The few people who saw Tang En and Josiah coming together just now couldn't help but reveal a few strange expressions when they saw this. There was even a faint trace of envy and admiration hidden in their eyes. Awesome. Taking advantage of the time when his female companion was changing clothes, he secretly went on a date with his lover. It can be said that he's really doing both at the same time without any delay. He's really a role model for us. Damn it, what are you doing, you bastard? Victor didn't think wrongly. He just thought wrongly. Thinking that Nilahong's bestial nature had flared up and he wanted to do something ugly on the spot, Nilahong immediately became anxious and hurriedly rushed over. In the cubicle. Who are you? Get out. Get out. With a slightly shrill voice due to fear, a tall blonde woman covered in a red dress tightly clung to the wooden wall on the left side of the cubicle. Looking at the strange middle-aged man who suddenly barged in, her heavily made-up face was shocked and angry. She shouted angrily, "If you don't get out, I'm going to call for help." Tisk, very familiar dialogue and scene. At this time, should I say that no one will come to save you even if you scream yourself hoarse? Oh, sorry, my taste seems to have changed a little recently, hee. With a chuckle, Tang En touched his nose. Don't worry, don't pretend. I believe that no one will come to save a ladyboy. A ladyboy whose body odor can't be concealed even with strong perfume. As soon as he finished, the narrow cubicle suddenly became quiet. In the next moment, killing intent suddenly appeared, and the heavily made-up face suddenly became ferocious and ruthless. The palm that covered the front of her long dress quickly swung out, and with a hiss it instantly crossed the narrow distance between the two of them and pierced straight into Tang En's heart. In the blink of an eye, the red dress fell down, revealing half of the dough-like chest that was tied with cloth strip. It looked really funny. However, it was naturally not the time to pay attention to this. At the front of the palm that was formed into a knife were 5 cold blades embedded in the fingernails. If she grasped it, she would probably dig out Tang En's heart directly. However, this was of course an impossible fantasy. In fact, when Tang En entered the shop and felt the killing intent, the ending was already decided. Stepping sideways, he raised his right hand slowly but quickly, drawing a half arc, and accurately grabbed the wrist that was attacking him. He bent it in the opposite direction. Crack, crack. The crisp sound of bones breaking sounded, making one's hair stand on end. Cold sweat instantly seeped out from the assassin's temples, not only because of the pain, but also because of the omnipresent pressure. It should be known that because of the same habits and styles, there would always be some resonance between peers. Just like how Tang En could still feel the existence of the assassin through a wooden door. However, even though he had already made his move, the assassin still couldn't feel the slightest familiar aura from Tang En, not even the slightest killing intent. What did this mean? Either it was an illusion, or the gap between the two of them was too big. I'm going to die. Although his heart sank, this assassin was a ruthless character. He didn't seem to feel that his wrist was broken at all. Without saying a word, he also took half a step forward brazenly and raised his knee to strike. At the same time, his left hand turned, and a short blade pierced between Tang En's eyebrows. Tang En didn't intend to let go of the wrist. First, he lifted his leg in advance and pressed the top of the assassin's knee as if he knew the future. Then, he pulled his wrist, and the 5 blades swept the side of the short blade. With a light tinkling sound, a weak spark flashed and the short blade was swept away. Then, he took half a step forward again and took the opportunity to hit the assassin's nose with his elbow. With a muffled groan, blood bloomed. The cubicle was narrow to begin with. Now that there were 2 people standing in it, there was no extra space to dodge. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that any one of them could directly injure the other in an instant. It could be said to be a dance on the edge of a knife, extremely thrilling. However, the actual situation at hand wasn't so thrilling. In just a few short moments, it was completely one-sided. Even when the tall assassin was forced to sit back on the chair in the cubicle, there wasn't any big movement. Perhaps, even if there was some movement, it would be covered by the sudden change of the tinkling music in the shop. Huff, huff. With his head raised, the assassin's nostrils kept boiling with blood flowing down his face. He was panting in a sorry state. Tang En bent over behind the chair and turned his head to look at the left side of the wooden wall where the assassin was standing when he came in. There was a neat hole on it, and it wouldn't be a problem for a person to squeeze through. Next to this cubicle was Josiah's changing room. Shaking his head, Tang En's expression was indifferent. With one hand, he firmly clamped down on the assassin who was struggling violently like a fish on land. With the other hand, he grabbed the trembling wrist with 5 blades and pierced it into the assassin's doughy left chest. He said faintly, "Buddy, you can't accept any mission. Listen, this is the death sonata. Rest in peace." As soon as he finished speaking, the blade pierced into the assassin's body with a poof and rotated. Creak, creak, creak. With the assassin's final struggle, the wooden chair let out a few screeching sounds that made one's teeth ache until it slowly subsided. The cubicle regained its silence. At some point in time, the soothing tune that was quietly flowing in the shop had turned into a heavy and sorrowful tune that sounded like weeping and complaining. This was the death sonata, which was usually used in funerals in other worlds. If it weren't for the fact that they didn't dare to offend the Grey Coat Army, this shop wouldn't have played this tune for themselves. Tang En picked up a piece of torn cloth from the red dress. While wiping the blood on his hands, he slowly hummed along with the tune. He was somewhat familiar with it. The first time Tang En heard this tune was in Liyan City. It was the same piano performance, but the pianist was Grimace. After wiping off the drops of blood that splashed on his face, Tang En tidied himself up in front of the mirror that was miraculously intact. Then, he threw away the bloody cloth and opened the wooden door. That's fast. Outside the door, Victor, who reached out his hand to push the door open, happened to see Tang En face to face. He couldn't help but blurt out subconsciously. "What?" "Oh, nothing, Right, you were inside just now." Victor glanced over Tang En's shoulder into the cubicle. His burly body suddenly tensed up. "I ran into an old friend, so I came over to say hi." He glided past and closed the wooden door behind him, avoiding the curious gazes of the men who were waiting not far away. Tang En turned his head and glanced at Josiah's changing room. It was still closed. When he shifted his gaze again, he saw the waitress from before leading a curly-haired man in a robe over from afar. He narrowed his long and narrow eyes and patted Victor's shoulder. "Let's go, another old friend is here." Remember to bring these old friends back so that I can play host." Without waiting for Victor to come back to his senses, Tang En smiled faintly and greeted the two waitresses. "I'm sorry you can't go over." When they approached the changing room area, the soldiers scattered around immediately stopped the curly-haired man behind the waitress. "This is our resident designer, he told your commander just now. Let them come over." Tang En waved his hand, but the soldiers naturally wouldn't listen to his command. They looked at Victor, who seemed to have just come back to his senses. He took a deep breath and waved his hand as well while walking over with a blank expression. The waitress approached and bowed her head saying, "Sir, this is our resident designer. Is it this shirt?" The curly-haired man held the black shirt Josiah had just chosen and took over the conversation. He raised the gray trousers in his left hand and smiled. "Try matching this style of trousers. It's simple and elegant. The effect should be good." Tang En shook his head. "I don't know how to match clothes. Since you're a professional, I'll listen to you." "Well, Mr. Designer, do you know music?" The curly-haired man was taken aback. Sorry, I don't know much." "I see. Then do you know what song is being played now?" He shrugged. "Oh, of course I know. It's the Death Sonata. I often hear it." Nodding, Tang En stepped forward casually, reached out his hand and sighed. "Since you know, why did you still come?" Chapter 909. Since you know, why did you still come? To be honest, there were many people in the world who would do something even though they knew it was impossible. In the end, it was just a matter of choice. To put it simply, one would not die if one did not seek death. The curly-haired man's smile froze. He quickly took a few steps back and looked at the waitress, who suddenly lowered her head and shivered. He frowned. Because of her? The curly-haired man thought that his disguise was excellent enough. Moreover, it had only been 10 seconds since they met, so it was basically impossible to see through him. As a result, the only loophole was naturally the waitress who was coerced. However, he did not know that the waitress was not to blame. The present Twain had already reached the peak of perfection in the path of assassination. As long as his mind was normal and he was rational, any trace of killing intent or evil thoughts in the surrounding area would not be able to escape. The curly-haired man's disguise was excellent, and his mentality was strong. However, as long as he came with killing intent, he would not be able to escape Tang En's senses. Of course, Tang En was too lazy to explain the inside story. He simply nodded and took another step forward. He appeared in front of the curly-haired man as if he had shrunk the ground into an inch. He bent his arm and waved his hand, slashing out a light hand chop. "Since you're here, rest in peace, fast. Too fast." After all, the curly-haired man was an assassin with the strongest sense of crisis. When he heard the sudden change in tune of the death sonata in the shop, it was impossible for him not to be suspicious. However, under such circumstances, he still dared to disguise himself as a resident designer to assassinate Feng Luo. He did not flee the scene immediately after being exposed, which meant that he had something to rely on. This was the so-called boldness of the skilled. However, as soon as they exchanged blows, the fatal hand chop was already in front of his throat. Although it was not a direct hit, the burning pain had already spread from his throat to the nerves in his brain, and alarm bells were ringing in his heart. In addition, what made the curly-haired assassin even more horrified was that the hand chop seemed light and slow, as if it could be easily dodged or counterattacked. However, the actual situation was that he could not control his body at all. It was as if he had instantly fallen into a glacier cave. His limbs were cold and stiff, and he could not move at all. Killing intent. This was the killing intent lock. Impossible! How could there be such a terrifying killing intent? The curly-haired man roared in his heart, and after a momentary daze, he instantly recognized the power that had trapped his body. However, being able to recognize him did not mean that he could resist. The reality of the situation was that he could only look on helplessly as that light hand knife kept approaching his throat. The only thing he could do was to stare at Tang En's indifferent face and slightly raise his left hand that was holding onto the gray trousers. It had only been a few sentences, and the surrounding people were completely unaware of what had happened, except for Victor, who had rushed over from behind. He saw the absurd and bloody scene in the cubicle and vaguely understood the situation. However, he wasn't able to sense that horrifying killing intent, so he was still greatly puzzled by the scene before him. According to Nilahong, this so-called designer was actually an assassin. Yet, of the two of them, one was waving his palms around like a tortoise, while the other was facing an attack. Not only did he not retaliate, he even handed the pants over to Zhang Xian. What was the meaning of this? Was there such a weak assassin? Of course, Tang En did not think that the curly-haired man in front of him was a rookie assassin. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, as if he had expected this. He gently raised his left hand and pressed it on the gray trousers. Through the fine silk fabric, he touched an ice-cold object. Then, under the despairing gaze of the curly-haired man, he reached out and turned the neatly folded trousers in the opposite direction. In the next instant, crack, puff, amidst the crisp sound of bones breaking, hiss, hiss, the curly-haired man's body trembled violently as if he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth and made a few unclear sounds, like the sound of wind leaking. Of course, this was caused by his throat being cut. However, when the curly-haired man subconsciously raised his arm, he did not cover his throat, but his lower abdomen. In a short moment, black and red blood quickly flowed out from between his fingers, and the stench was abnormal. Before the blood dripped, Tang En stepped forward and grabbed the gray trousers. He pressed on the curly-haired man's lower abdomen with one hand and put his other hand on the man's shoulder. He turned around in a seemingly intimate manner. "Haha, you are indeed a professional. I am very satisfied with your suggestion. Why don't I trouble you to choose a set of clothes for my brother?" "Hiss." And he patted the man's shoulder. "If you don't object, it means that you agree. Haha, you are indeed a straightforward person. This is the one, Brother Victor. You can slowly talk about the details." Victor, who had just arrived, was stunned when he heard this. He subconsciously took the curly-haired man who was twitching slightly. Just as he was about to ask Tang En something, his palm touched and his body could not help but tremble. Half of the trousers were hanging down, and the gurgling black blood quickly spread down. Near the top of the trousers, there was a small and exquisite crossbow. The string on it was empty, and it had obviously been fired. Victor looked down and instantly sucked in a breath of cold air. Obviously, the so-called resident designer was indeed an assassin. He took the opportunity to bring the trousers and hid the exquisite crossbow that could cause great damage at close range. But for some reason, in the end, he reaped what he sowed and the arrow shot into his lower abdomen. And from the abnormal blood, it was obvious that the arrow was smeared with some kind of deadly poison. In the end, the poisonous blood did not drip down. A hand picked up the trousers and stuffed it into Victor's hand. Take it and send it to reunite with the old friend just now. Looking at the faint face that was close at hand, for some reason, Victor suddenly felt a chill in his heart. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the gray trousers and nodded. Okay. Tang En casually clapped his hands as if he was dusting off the dust. He turned around and looked at the waitress who was still trembling with her head down. And, like a rabbit that was shot by an arrow, the waitress suddenly screamed with her head in her hands. Because of the angle, she was actually the only witness of this silent battle. She even saw the short arrow go through the gray trousers and into the curly-haired assassin's lower abdomen. Fortunately, Tang En's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He instantly covered the waitress's mouth and stopped the scream in her mouth. Calm down, beautiful lady, don't be agitated. I know you were coerced. This is not your fault. Don't kill me, the waitress said in a muffled voice. Her body trembled like a quail in the wind and rain. Of course I won't kill you. In fact, I still need your help. And the gray trousers just now are not bad, bring me another pair. Tang En patted the waitress's shoulder that was gradually calming down and said gently, Don't worry, we bought the trousers just now. We won't go back on our word. Okay. Please wait a moment, I'll go get it for you. Thank you. And take your time, there's no rush. After sending away the stumbling waitress, Victor on the other side intimately hugged the curly-haired man and walked into the cubicle just now. It was best not to make a big fuss when they came out to play. First, he would put the bodies of the two assassins here, then he would ask the people outside to quietly carry them out later. However, the men on the side naturally didn't know the inside story. They only saw that Tang En suddenly broke into the female changing room. At that time, there was a blonde woman in a red dress with a good figure. After a while, Tang En left with a smile on his face with a satisfied expression. Now they saw Victor and the curly-haired man walking in together. The men looked at each other and couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. F***CK. Is this the rhythm of taking turns? What a beast. Ahem, I don't know if we will have a chance later, what's wrong? Just as he opened the wooden door of the changing room and walked out, Josiah heard the low exclamation one after another. He couldn't help but be stunned. Nothing. Well, it's beautiful. He touched his chin and looked at Josiah's clothes. Although it was winter, this black clothes-fitting top still highlighted the beautiful curves of Josiah's upper body. It looked really tempting. Tang En generously gave a thumbs up and praised aloud. Thank you. Josiah turned around in a circle. He was very satisfied after looking at himself and accepted the praise with a chuckle. Then he quickly realized something. He turned his head and looked around. He said in confusion, This is Death Sonata? The owner of this shop, really has a personality. Isn't he afraid of scaring away the customers? Who knows? Tang En shrugged his shoulders without any pressure. Maybe he took the wrong medicine, making it look like a funeral. Before he could finish his sentence, a whole rack of clothes fell to the ground with a bang, scattering all over the floor. Sitting on it was the waitress who brought the gray trousers with an aggrieved face. He spread his hands. Look, even the waitress is careless. This shop has no future. A moment later, at the entrance of the shop. What a great harvest. Let's continue. Our mission today is to play all over Shanghai City. Haha. Okay, you have the final say. But, compared to Tang En, who was in high spirits, Joshua looked a little confused. He turned his head and looked into the shop again and again. Did you do something again? Why did those people look at me strangely just now? You're thinking too much. Believe me, anyone who looks at a beauty is weird. How could they not be weird? Leader, you just changed your clothes, and we already killed 2 people. Speaking of which, it was that fellow who did it. Why do we have to clean up after him? We are the real guards. How did we end up doing odd jobs? We have to carry all the things we buy. At the back, Victor, whose face was filled with resentment, let out a long sigh. He casually threw the bags hanging on his body to the guards outside. Then, he made a hand signal and was about to bring a group of soldiers back into the shop to deal with the aftermath. Just at this moment, suddenly, so. 3 sharp sounds pierced through the air. Before he could raise his head, a strong gust of wind arrived in front of him. Killing intent suddenly appeared. Chapter 9-10. Humans were unique individuals who were contradictory yet harmonious at the same time. Sometimes, with the tenacity of its vitality, even if it was buried deep underground and drowned in the waves, it would still be safe and sound in the end, narrowly escaping death. Sometimes their vitality would be extremely fragile. They were so fragile that ordinary actions such as raising their head to drink water or jumping downstairs would result in them coughing, choking to death, and having their bones crushed. There was no reason, and there was no need to reason. To use a mysterious saying, if the king of hell ordered someone to die at midnight, he would not let them live until 5 o'clock. That was all. It was not an exaggeration. If one were to count carefully, there were definitely more than 10,000 ways to die. Of course, in the eyes of professionals who were proficient in this field, there might be even more. There was no doubt that the assassin who suddenly launched a long-range attack could definitely be called a professional. At that time, Tang En and Josiah had just stepped out of the shop. It was dark inside and outside the shop, so they could not help but squint their eyes to avoid the light. They were chatting and laughing again, whispering to each other about the contents of their harvest. It was the most relaxed moment. At that moment, Victor, who was the real commander of the guards, was about to return to the shop with his back facing the people. It was also the moment when the surrounding defense line was loosened. It was precisely at that moment that they were instantly seized. Before they could react, 3 black shadows pierced through the air with infinite killing intent. They passed through the bustling streets and above the crowd, and went straight to the front. The strength, angle, and timing of the attack were all perfect. It was no exaggeration to say that this was a textbook example of a classic long-range assassination. Suddenly, thunder roared. Block! The soldiers who were selected to protect Josiah's safety were naturally the best of the best. In fact, before Victor, who had seen the danger coming from the corner of his eyes, roared, the few soldiers closest to him had already subconsciously jumped out and blocked in front of Josiah without hesitation, forming a human shield. They did not need to know how powerful the attack was or where the target was. They only needed to know that as long as they blocked in front of their leader Josiah, then their protection would be successful. For this, even if he had to sacrifice his life, he would not hesitate. However, in the next moment, the few soldiers who had risked their lives to charge forward suddenly felt their bodies lighten, and a faint sigh of helplessness entered their ears. Even if you want to die, you should find the right time, brothers. Then, they flew back at a speed faster than when they came. F***CK. The person involved didn't know the situation, but Victor, who was at the back, saw it clearly. The person who suddenly appeared to snatch the sword and kick the soldiers away was Nilahong. He was indeed a spy. Soon after, under Victor's gaze that was on the verge of splitting apart, this spy suddenly swung his saber and retreated explosively. Boom! 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 Flames flashed in all directions, and it was as if thunder had suddenly exploded in the sky above the street. waves of air swept out, and the signboards of the shops on both sides of the street shattered at the same time, flying in all directions. Mixed with the unconscious screams of terror from the crowd below, for a moment it was like the scene of a disaster, and it was extremely chaotic. Explosive arrows, cough cough. Damn it. Because the location of the explosion was right above the street near the women's clothing shop, Victor, who was caught off guard, was immediately sent flying into the shop by the waves of air, crushing a few racks of clothes. While he was in a sorry state and angry state, he instantly understood that the 3 black shadows that attacked him weren't ordinary arrows, but explosive arrows with small explosive crystals tied to them. He couldn't help but feel a lingering fear in his heart. At the same time, he also immediately understood the intentions of that spy from before, that Nilahong. If he hadn't kicked the soldiers away in time and swung his sword to hit the arrows, when the explosive arrows hit the armor on the soldiers, the terrifying explosion would have directly blasted them away, and the consequences would obviously not be as simple as being blown away by the waves of air. Had he wronged him? Shaking his head, Victor instantly came back to his senses. Now wasn't the time to think about this. Since that assassin had used explosive arrows, he was naturally very clear about the chaotic situation that would follow. In other words, the opponent definitely had a backup plan. Shaking off the various women's clothing that had wrapped around his body, he pressed against the ground and leaped toward the door of the shop. He looked around and roared, "Get up, all of you F*King get up, where is the leader? Protect the leader. Be careful." As soon as he rushed out of the door, before he could see the surroundings clearly, Victor raised his head and saw a black shadow that was even faster than him rapidly passing through the gray sky above the street, drawing a straight and clear arrow trajectory. Further away, on top of the wall of the alley more than 100 meters away, half of a blurry figure could be seen vaguely in an archery posture. Needless to say, this person was naturally the assassin who had been hiding in the dark to launch a sneak attack. However, Victor's attention wasn't there. Following the trajectory of the arrow, he subconsciously turned his head and saw Josiah, who had just changed into new clothes, standing against the wall, unharmed, as if the explosion just now hadn't affected her. Now, she was lowering her head and tugging at the hem of her clothes, calm and collected, as if she didn't see the arrow that was about to hit her. Magic shield, support the shield, leader." Josiah was calm, but Victor, who was beside her, felt as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his head. His body and mind were cold, and even his heart felt as if it had skipped a few beats. However, in the next moment, he seemed to have understood why the leader was so calm. But, hair flying, Josiah's hand firmly grasped the rapid arrow 3 inches in front of her eyebrows. No matter how it spun and struggled, it couldn't move an inch. Phew! It's this guy again. Victor took a deep breath, and the weight in his heart slowly fell to the ground. Now, he couldn't wait to go up and hug this Nilaum who always appeared at critical moments. He even had the impulse to kiss her a few times to express the surging gratitude in his heart. Of course, Tang En didn't know what Victor was thinking. Otherwise, it would be hard to say if he could still hold the arrow in his hand firmly. After tidying up her new clothes, Josiah frowned slightly and asked calmly, "I felt that something was strange in the shop just now. Have you started to take action?" As the leader of the Grey Coat Army, she had long been prepared to be assassinated at any time. Moreover, she had personally experienced it many times, so she was already used to it. What's more, now that Tang En was by her side, she naturally wasn't afraid. In fact, compared to being assassinated, she was more worried about whether her shopping trip would be affected. Looking at the black feather arrow in his hand and weighing it, Tang En casually said, "It's okay, just some clowns. We'll continue shopping after we've dealt with them." After saying that, he narrowed his eyes and looked up at the wall of the alley 100 meters away. At this time, the chaos on the street had just begun. The crowd that came back to their senses was in an uproar. They subconsciously ran to the various shops on the street, exclaiming one after another. However, the dust in the air had slightly dispersed, and the figure of the assassin who was crouching there could be clearly seen. He had his bow and arrow nocked and was pointing directly at them. Both sides looked at each other for a few seconds. Just as Victor roared and led people to surround the assassin seemed to know that he couldn't do anything. He put down his bow and arrow, glanced coldly at them, and slowly drew his hand across his neck. Facing them, or more accurately, Tang En, he made a standard throat-slitting gesture. Then, he put away his bow and arrow, obviously wanting to retreat. If the attack didn't hit, he would flee 1,000 miles away. It had to be said that whether it was from the previous plan, the timing of the attack, his own strength, and the decision to retreat now, etc., this unknown assassin was an extremely outstanding and ruthless character. If Tang En wasn't here today, the outcome would really be hard to say, but now… Damn it, look at my bad temper. After being made a throat-slitting gesture by his colleague, Tang En seemed to be angry. Without thinking, he stepped forward and waved his hand. With a whoosh, the black feather arrow with a little imperceptible bloodlight shot back at a speed that was not inferior to the speed when it came. But at this time, it's too slow, what a pity. Victor narrowed his eyes and looked at the empty wall in the distance. He thought that even if the arrow could accurately go back and forth, it should be one step slower. What's more, it was just a casual throw. How could it be accurate, as expected? With a bang, the black feather arrow didn't disappoint and hit the wall in the distance. It seemed to be quite powerful, and it even raised a little bit of dust. Amazing! After a moment of silence, Victor spat out these two words expressionlessly. This wasn't sarcasm. In a situation where he wasn't prepared, a casual throw from a distance of 100 meters not only had sufficient strength, but the accuracy was also not much off. It was just below the wall where the assassin disappeared. Even if it failed, it was still praiseworthy. Of course, the more outstanding this Nilahong was, the more incompetent they were. Victor naturally wouldn't praise him too much. Saying that he was amazing was already the limit. On the other hand, Josiah widened his eyes in surprise. He looked at Tang En as if he had seen an unbelievable scene. You missed? How can that be? He's so arrogant. If I don't teach him a lesson, he'll really think that my reputation as a top assassin is made of mud. Let's go, let's continue shopping. Don't spoil the mood. Waving his hand casually, Tang En leisurely passed through the panicked crowd and continued moving forward. Josiah tilted his head and thought for a while. He looked at the stone wall in the distance and followed with a smile. Victor, who was at the back, was instantly conflicted when he saw this. He wasn't conflicted because Nilahong was trying to maintain his reputation. He obviously missed the arrow, but he still said it in such a dignified manner, as if it was true. Logically speaking, he should be organizing people to surround and kill the assassin. However, Josiah obviously didn't have the intention to go back now. As the commander of his personal guards, he naturally couldn't leave. After weighing the pros and cons, Victor could only hammer his palms and wave his hand to lead the guards to continue following behind the two of them. Of course, his impression of Tang En, who not only didn't persuade leader Josiah to go back, but also continued to urge him to go shopping. Chapter 9:11. The chaos on the streets came suddenly and left just as quickly. For ordinary passers-by, they only heard 3 loud noises above their head. At most, they were startled by the shattered signboards and glass on both sides of the road. They did not suffer any actual injuries, nor did they see the scene of an arrow attack. Hence, when there was no further movement, especially when they saw the gray-coat army soldiers rushing over, they calmed down and the chaotic scene quickly calmed down. At this time, Tang En and his group had already disappeared from this street and came to the business street that Shanghai City did not lack. They continued their shopping trip in high spirit. Of course, what happened next was not so peaceful. The previous few consecutive raids were like the official opening of the assassination. Whether it was strolling through the shops, stopping by the roadside stalls to taste the local delicacies, or walking among the crowd, as long as it was Tang En and Joshua, all kinds of assassinations would follow and be displayed one by one. It was like a vivid and practical encyclopedia of the assassination scene. However, unlike the previous long-range sneak attacks that caused a huge commotion, most of the assassination methods were done in small details. Releasing a biting cold killing intent without alarming anyone was the normal style of an assassin. Of course, in the end, it was all quiet and no one heard about it. It was like a stage play with a predetermined script, and both sides followed certain rules. If you come to assassinate, I will kill you. He came quietly and left quietly. Rely on your own ability and leave it to fate. Such a strange yet harmonious scene caused Victor and the others who were following behind to be dumbfounded, and they had mixed feelings in their hearts. If they were to sum it up, it would probably be shock and humiliation. Shock was easy to understand. First, they were shocked by the various assassination methods of the assassins, their flawless disguise skills, and the terrifying strength that appeared from time to time. Secondly, they were shocked by the heaven-defying ability of the guy called Nilahong to see through them and deal with them directly. On the streets, he greeted them with a smile, thinking that he had met someone familiar, but when he brushed past them, he casually broke their neck. At the roadside stalls, he handed over money with one hand and took the snacks with the other, praising the boss for his exquisite skills and the tempting smell of the food. But in the next moment, he directly stuffed the food into the mouth of the other party, smiling as he watched the other party's face turn green, turn black, and spit out bubbles. On the streets, the clown on the stage randomly invited people to perform a magic trick. Without waiting for them to object, he pulled the leader onto the stage. In the end, he pulled open the curtain and the magic trick succeeded. He and the leader came out, but the clown was gone. In truth, with the situation developing, even Victor, who was full of confidence, could not help but feel terrified. He was clear that if it was just them accompanying Josiah to go shopping, then they would not be able to go back. They probably would not be able to. This wasn't to say that they were incompetent. It was just that they were naturally at a disadvantage when dealing with such a situation. In fact, if they were the only guards, they would not have allowed Joshua to leave the city lord's mansion in the first place. Or even if they were to leave, they would have the army to hold the line, the cavalry to clear the path, and the scouts to patrol. They might as well eliminate all the risk factors in the surroundings. Of course, they would not be shopping casually, but inspecting the territory. As for the humiliation, it was just as mentioned before. The more outstanding Tang En's nonchalant performance was, the more ashamed they were. One had to know that they were the real bodyguard. That fellow was at most a playboy and a troublemaker. But now? This Nilahong opened up a path and crushed everything, directly killing all kinds of dangers in the bud. They could only foolishly follow behind as spectators. Oh, they also had to carry corpses and carry things. Damn it, there was no such thing as a slap in the face. In the end, Victor and the others simply became numb. Shopping? Continue shopping. Buy things? Carry bags. Someone died again? Oh, go and carry. What lack of people. Damn it, is it finally our turn to appear? Oh, lack of people to carry corpses. Wait, go back and call for people. How could they endure this? Dusk, the setting sun was about to disappear. Just as Victor and the others were familiarizing themselves with most of the commercial streets, women's clothing stores, and scenic spots in Shanghai City, as well as discovering the blind spots of the patrolling soldiers, which were the places where the assassins had made their moves, they started to seriously consider whether they were suitable for the job of a bodyguard, or whether they should return to the military. At this moment, Tang En and Josiah finally stretched their bodies and suggested returning to the Castellan's manor. Returned, are you sure the leader and the others have returned? Victor, who had returned for the third time to call people to carry the corpses, looked at the soldiers in front of him, who were relieved, and asked seriously. Yes, Commander. They called a car and left, I am sure. Phew. Finally, rubbing his temples, Victor let out a long sigh. He felt that his burning face had finally cooled down. Following which, he smirked and said viciously, Damn it, go back and gather people. Find the most professional people to train them to the death. Yes. The soldier replied bitterly, waving his hand, Let's go, those damn. Where are the corpses of the assassins? Deal with them and go back. Oh right. Stopping in his tracks, Victor's eyes twitched and he said solemnly, Pass down the order, everything that happened today is to be buried in your stomach. I can't afford to lose face. Yes. After being a spectator for half a day, we can't afford to lose face. The aftermath was dealt with really quickly. The main reason was that after half a day of silent and crazy killing, there were fewer and fewer assassins who dared to act. In fact, in the end, if not for the fact that Twain looked really harmless, and that there were so many loopholes and flaws in the guards around Josiah, which were very tempting, the assassins, who were extremely sensitive to danger, would not have taken action one after another. Looking at the last corpse being placed into a bag and carried into the black-curtained carriage, Victor waved to the coachman, Go. Remember to inform the brothers at the city gate and find a place to bury them outside the city. Well, it's about time. Count the hands and go back. The atmosphere on the way back was a little gloomy, just like the sunset that was gradually fading. To be honest, the guards didn't know what they should be feeling now. Logically speaking, after killing so many assassins, the security risks in the city were greatly reduced. It was not too much for them to hold a celebratory feast. But thinking about what happened in the afternoon and the role they played in it, they really couldn't feel happy. After a moment, a self-deprecating remark broke the silence. Although it was embarrassing enough, at least the guard work of the mayor's mansion will be much easier, right? Haha. Under the many silent gazes around, the laughter became more and more forced and weak, and finally stopped awkwardly. Then, probably because he had a good relationship with the speaker, a guard tried to ease the atmosphere, say, That guy. And, that sir, how many assassins did he kill in half a day? I saw that no one dared to make a move on the leader in the last hour. Could it be that he killed all the assassins in the city? In any case, he was one of them, and coupled with the battle record, even if everyone had a deep grudge against Tang En, they had to be more polite at this time. It's impossible to kill all of them. Didn't that sir scare away a lot of them? But, after half a day of intimidation, even if the assassins in the city wanted to make a move, they would have to think about the consequences first. Yes, killing all the evils in the city in half a day, it's scary. Where did this person come from? Is there such a person in the Grey Coat Army? I heard that he's from a secret organization. That's not right. Most of the people in the secret organization were old people from the Grey Coat Army. I've been here for so many years, but I've never heard of him. Could he be a new member? That's a good thing. That sir must have, at least the strength of a high-level warrior. Are you kidding me? How strong are the assassins today? What about now? I'm guessing he's at the Earth level. And maybe he's at the Void level. Haha, that's a bit exaggerated. How many Void-level warriors are there in the whole continent? How can it be so easy to see one? That's true, ahem. Just as the atmosphere became more intense, the middle-aged guard captain walking beside Victor looked at the former's gloomy face and quickly coughed a few times. He said in a deep voice, Are you very proud? No matter how good that sir's performance is, it's still someone else's honor. You should compare yourself with what we've done in the past half a day. Isn't it embarrassing enough? Pause for a while, glanced at everyone, and the atmosphere suddenly became solemn. He then continued, Besides, no matter how strong one is, it's inevitable that there will be mistakes. It's not like that sir didn't make a mistake today. Did he? After watching the miraculous anti-assassination scene for a long time, everyone was still in a daze. They only felt that in their impression, that person really didn't make a mistake. As long as an assassin got close to the leader, if they were not scared away by his words, they would be dead. Nonsense, think about the assassin who ambushed us with arrows outside the shop at the beginning. Everyone suddenly realized that there was such a situation, but they didn't think much of it. After half a day, that assassin was indeed the only lucky person who managed to escape when the leader attacked. However, if one considered the actual situation, the assassin was a long-range ambush, and if he missed, he would immediately flee. On this side, Nilahong missed and could not leave the leader's side, so naturally, he could not chase. Even if he missed, it was too much. His footsteps paused, and Victor seemed to have thought about something. He frowned and turned around. Wait, you mentioned that assassin. Did he take the arrow off the wall? I don't think so. At that time, the leader was in a rush to go shopping, so we followed. And it's nearby. Turning around and looking at the surroundings, the middle-aged guard captain asked, "Should we send someone to take it down?" The current Shanghai city placed a lot of importance on stability. Although an arrow nailed to the wall could not prove anything, the surrounding people would still feel uneasy. Waving his hand, Victor said, "Go now, we will wait here." Okay. It was indeed nearby. Very quickly, the two guards that were sent out returned smoothly. However, what they brought back was not only a broken arrow, but also a corpse. Bending over, Victor looked at the cold corpse in black clothes and the dried blood stains. He was startled. What happened? It's that assassin. Commander. Licking his lips, the guard excitedly took out a longbow and the broken end of the arrow. His voice trembled as he spoke incoherently. When we went over, we found that the arrow had pierced through the wall. The end of the arrow was nailed to the wall, while the tip of the arrow had been cut off. We searched the vicinity, and found the assassin's corpse in the depths of the alleyway a few dozen meters away. This guy was truly a ruthless character. His body was pierced through by the arrow, and he should still be hanging in the air, but he was still able to pull out a dagger and cut off the arrow on his back. Right, the process of cutting off the arrow caused him to lose a lot of blood, which was why he couldn't escape. Wait a minute, my brain is a bit messy. Let me sort it out. Wait a minute. Patting his head, the middle-aged guard captain pointed at the corpse on the ground and tried his best to frown as he analyzed. You mean, this person is the archer assassin who attacked us from a distance? That is to say, Nilahong's arrow pierced through the wall, and even pinned the assassin who retreated behind the wall? Finishing his words, the surrounding people looked at each other, and were all speechless. Yes. That's what I meant. A miracle. No, a miracle, an absolute miracle. Luckily, there aren't many people living around that alley, and it's relatively remote. It's not unreasonable for the assassin to choose that place for his sneak attack. He didn't scare anyone when he died. Captain, what's wrong? The middle-aged guard captain paused for a moment. He held onto the swaying body of the middle-aged guard captain and asked in a hoarse voice. No, nothing. It's a bit messy, just a bit messy. Holding his head, the middle-aged guard captain stared blankly at the surrounding soldiers who collectively swallowed their saliva. Then, he turned his head to look at the stupefied Victor. After a while, he asked in an extremely dry voice, "Commander, do you think we should retire?" Chapter 9:12. Tang'an didn't stay in Shanghai City for too long. The next day, he and Josiah continued to walk around Shanghai City. Apart from watching the trial of the evil nobles and killing a few assassins, he didn't make a move for the entire day. Of course, the main reason was that no assassins dared to come within 100 meters of him. This allowed him and Josiah to have fun without any pressure. No one was an idiot, and the assassins who walked on the edge of life and death were even more so. If 1 or 2 assassins died, it would be an accident. However, when the number of assassins increased to close to 100, all the surviving assassins knew that an incredible killing god had appeared beside their target. They didn't give up on the assassination, but at least it was no longer suitable to do so in this city, no matter how good the opportunity was. As for such a situation, Tang En had expected it. Hence, after the city quietened down, he immediately suggested to Josiah that they should head out of the city to fight at the front lines. In truth, as the leader of the Grey Coat Army, if Josiah personally went to the front lines, it would naturally raise the morale of the army. Before, he didn't go because of safety concerns. Now that he had Tang En, he obviously didn't have to worry anymore. They hit it off immediately. There were many people who went with him, apart from Josiah's side. On Tang En's side, apart from Lena, David and the others who had followed him previously all went. In truth, this was also one of Tang En's goals. After all, Lena was a woman. Although she had some ability to protect herself, it wasn't convenient or safe for her to follow these men around. Staying in this relatively stable rear was undoubtedly the best choice. Joshua had also given her a superior position, even transferring her to his own personal guard brigade to ensure her safety. Usually, she only needed to be responsible for repairing the damaged purple cannons, and no one would be able to control her. After deciding on the people who would go to the front lines, the group officially left the city. According to Tang En's suggestion, they were divided into 2 groups. Firstly, Tang En led Josiah, David, and the rest, as well as the personal guards led by Victor, to lead the way in front. Secondly, the higher-ups of the Grey Coat Army who went along with them led the army and followed behind from dozens of miles away. To be honest, this was not a wise suggestion. Everyone knew that it was safest for Josiah to stay in the army. Those assassins did not dare to make a move in the city. Of course, it was because of Tang En's thunder technique, but it was also because of the soldiers patrolling the city at all times. It was the home turf of the Grey Coat Army, so it was not easy to use some overly intense assassination methods. However, it was hard to say what would happen once they left the city. However, Tang En also had his own considerations. He could not always be by Josiah's side to protect him. Although they were not afraid of ordinary assassins, they would also become obvious target. Once Wu Ding came knocking on their door, there would be nowhere to hide. Now, only by intimidating the assassins in the dark and making them not dare to make a move or hesitate to make a move would Tang En be able to free up his hands to face Wu Ding. In the end, it was Josiah who came forward to suppress all kinds of opinions and agreed with Tang En's decision. Therefore, 2 days later, Tang En and Josiah's shopping trip turned into a more extensive sightseeing tour. Sure enough, not long after the group left the city, the personal guards who were scouting the periphery found signs that they were being watched. Therefore, Victor and the others, who had been beaten black and blue by Tang En over the past 2 days and who had been constantly talking about retirement, were hit hard again. This time, it was not Tang En who made a move, but Tang En's entourage, which was David and the others, who had been almost ignored by Victor and the others. As the Grey Space Team, which had been trained by Tang En, they had shocked the Grey Coat Army a year ago. Now that they were facing many of their peers, their performance could only be described as valiant. Generally speaking, an assassin's sense of smell was very sensitive. Some experienced ones even had an almost natural sense for all kinds of danger. Therefore, very soon, the assassins who followed them out of the city were extremely sensitive to the strange atmosphere flowing in the air. It seemed like they had been counter-assassinated? That was the truth. Due to the limited number of people who came this time, once the group set off, David and the others were scattered around by themselves. It just so happened that assassins never liked to team up. Once they fought alone, regardless of whether it was in terms of strength, martial arts, assassination methods, concealment, etc., David and the others, who were from the gray space and had been taught by Zwafan, could easily defeat most assassins. Even if they met a few difficult ones, David and the others, who had good eyesight, didn't try to be brave. They just sent a message back, and Tangen would come over and take care of them. Therefore, Victor and the others were met with another tragedy. Originally, they thought that when they reached the open space, no matter how strong Nilahong was, he would inevitably be unable to take care of both the front and back. There would be a time when they would be of use. But in the end, they still entered the spectator mode. Just as they found traces of an assassin's surveillance, before Victor could arrange his tactics and determine the hunting area, news came that the assassin had fallen off the cliff and died, or hung on a tree, or was crushed by a rock. After investigating the scene and checking the few people who often disappeared in the group, Victor knew who was the culprit. At first, he still had the confidence to compete and not be in the limelight. After all, even if he couldn't win against that perverted guy, he couldn't lose to the other party's followers. But in the face of the bloody reality again and again, as well as the other party's extremely courteous rescue of the people he sent out, and vaguely reminding them to be careful, it seemed that the other party was sincere. Victor wisely gave up on this thought. Before his side was completely reduced to useless teammates, he obediently guarded the surroundings of the group. He calculated the itinerary, did what he should do, and never overstepped his boundaries. He sighed inwardly. Perhaps it's time to retire. Unlike the dispirited Victor, Tang En spent these few days very comfortably and enjoyed it very much. It wasn't because of the scenery, but because of the people accompanying him. They had been separated for a year. Even though his relationship with Josiah hadn't changed, and even more because of the long period of time he missed him, they still felt a little awkward. However, it was inevitable that they would be somewhat unfamiliar with each other. This was something that was determined by time and distance, and could not be changed. This rare period of leisure was the best glue. Even if the journey was boring, it was also a romantic journey. Even if the wilderness entered his eyes, he could still feel the fragrance of flowers and plants blooming in his heart, and he could find joy. Thinking about it, this was also the so-called interest of lovers. It had nothing to do with time and space. It existed in one heart. No matter how sweet the journey was, there would always be an end. After walking for around 5 days, just as the group approached the front lines, Tang En received a piece of news from a secret channel. The importance of intelligence in war was naturally needless to say. Today, the various sources of intelligence for the Grey Coat Army mostly relied on the well-run secret organization in Tang En's hand. After the Grey Coat Army killed their way out of the 100,000 mountains, Tang En had made all the necessary arrangements. And after he made a trip to Shanghai City, the military intelligence collected by the secret organization was handed over to the Grey Coat Army. Of course, they would also send a copy to Tang En. For example, 3 days ago, Twain and Joshua had learned that Fry had sent 2,000 men to infiltrate deep into the enemy's territory, pretending to be reinforcements of the Tiger Roar Legion. They had successfully launched a night attack on Hanshui City and Quzhi City, opening up the war in one fell swoop. They were like tigers in a perimeter of 100 miles, taking whatever they wanted. It could be said that they had limitless glory. For this, Fry had specially sent someone to deliver a thank-you letter to Twain, thanking him for sending the Tiger Roar Legion's troop deployment document. He even said that he must treat Twain to drinks and so on. However, the news this time was a little special. The door opened. "Husband, tell David and the others to restrain themselves." Josiah carried a teapot and walked into the carriage. He looked a little helpless. "If this continues, my personal guards will be disbanded." "It's okay, it's healthier to be abused. Without pressure, where would the motivation come from? You must know that they can protect my wife's personal guards. If they don't have this ability, then they should be disbanded." As he spoke casually, he put down the letter in his hand. Tang En chuckled, took the teapot and placed it on the table. Then, he opened his arms. Josiah pursed his lips and naturally lay in Tang En's arms. It's easy for you to say. Do you think everyone is as perverted as the gray space? Ha, that's true. Well, then let's reveal the identity of David and the others to Victor. That should make it easier for him to accept. But is that okay? Josiah looked up doubtfully and said hesitantly, Won't it expose your identity? Don't worry, there are many smart people in this world. Tang En scratched Josiah's white jade nose and smiled. Previously, when you went against all opinions and agreed with my way of traveling, those old foxes at the top should have been suspicious, but have you heard them mention this topic? Josiah tilted his head and thought for a while, then nodded. Well, then let's do it. He lowered his head and saw the letter on the table in front of him. Hey, is there another intelligence report? What is it about? Tang En stretched and said casually, the brand sent 2 troops from the front line. Which 2 troops? Who is the commander? What's the scale? They're finally here. Josiah was shocked when he heard this, but just as he frowned, Tang En reached out and gently smoothed his eyebrows. It's okay, just 2 old acquaintances. Old acquaintances? Well, it's interesting. Let me think, there seems to be a chance. TSK, let's try it. Maybe I can give Brother Fry a big gift. Chapter 9:13. Raccoon has seen the opinions of all the readers. Sorry, I won't say anything else. From tomorrow onwards, the update will be restored to its original state. 2 updates a day, at least 5,000 words. This winter, with the emergence of the Grey Coat Army and their ferocious attitude, the weather had undoubtedly become colder. The entire northern part of Bulan wasn't exactly desolate, but there was always a huge haze hanging over it, making it seem like dusk was falling. Early in the morning, the sun had just risen. Outside a certain large city in the hinterland of the north, the surroundings were silent. Suddenly, a shrill whistle resounded through the sky and instantly broke the silence. In an instant, there were shadows everywhere, and the city walls were in a mess. It was not until a few murderous roars were heard that the messy city wall garrison troops calmed down a little. They knocked their arrows and pointed their longbows towards the north. A few miles away, a cloud of dust with an iron-blooded aura was rapidly approaching. Soldiers who had been through cruel wars could roughly judge the size of the incoming troops from the cloud of dust. There were only 2,000 to 3,000 cavalrymen. Even if they were all elite soldiers, they could still defend themselves with the tall city walls. Only the garrison troops who had been idling in the rear and had not been on the battlefield for most of their lives would be so flustered. However, they probably saw the tense atmosphere here and wanted to avoid any misunderstandings. When the cloud of dust approached the attack range of the city defense equipment, it slowed down significantly, revealing the flag of the Thunderbolt's army. Then, from a few miles away, both sides looked at each other in silence. A moment later, a few cavalrymen carrying the flag of the Thunderbolt's army slowly rushed down the city wall. In the middle of the thousands of cavalrymen, a burly general with a black beard frowned as he looked at the tense atmosphere on the city wall in the distance. He could not help but have some doubts in his slightly impatient expression. Aside from their combat strength, the garrison troops were also soldiers. Naturally, it was impossible for them not to recognize the flag of the Thunderbolt's army. Logically speaking, the city gate should be opened to welcome them. However, the rows of soldiers standing outside the city wall did not seem to have any intention of putting down their bows. This was a little puzzling. The negotiation between the 2 sides did not seem to be going well. After more than 10 minutes, there was still no movement at the city gate. Just as the black-bearded general's expression became more and more impatient, the cavalrymen carrying the war flag finally rushed back. The tall and heavy iron gate behind them slowly opened. "General, we can enter the city now, but the enemy wants us to dismount and advance." Frowning, he asked, "Why are you being so careful? What's going on?" "General, a few days ago, The rebels in gray disguised themselves as soldiers of the Tiger Roar Legion and deceived us into opening the gates of the cities in the front line at night. They took down 2 strategically important cities, so, is there such a thing? Idiot, don't tell me they don't check the transfer order during wartime? It's said that the gray shirt rebels used these 2 items to trick the city gate. That's a good move. The black-bearded general was taken aback. He shook his head and gestured with his hand. Let's go. Let's enter the city first. As soon as he finished speaking, without waiting for the thousands of cavalry to dismount from their horses, suddenly, there was an uproar from the top of the wall in the distance. The half-open city gate was closed again, and the bows that were originally pressed down were raised high again. However, this time, it wasn't in this direction. Instead, it was on the left side of the official road. Seeing the sudden change, they naturally couldn't enter the city again. Looking at the smoke rising from the left side of the official road, he ordered the thousands of cavalry to change direction and get into an attack formation. Their killing intent instantly soared. From the reactions of both sides in this short period of time, one could see that the combat power of the thousands of cavalry was far superior to the panicked garrison soldiers on the top of the wall. The huge cloud of dust that was advancing at high speed in the distance seemed to have sensed the iron-blooded aura of the cavalry as it approached. It slowed down after a short distance. Ashen Flame Legion. So it's this guy. He's not slow. The black-bearded general snorted. He wasn't the idiot on the top of the wall. He squinted at the blurry flag in the cloud of dust. Not only did he recognize the legion that the enemy was from, but he also seemed to know the identity of the general. The enemy was indeed from the Ashen Flame Legion, and their scale was clearly much larger than the Thunderbolt's army. With a rough look, one could see that there were no less than 10,000 soldiers. After a while, a few Ashen Flame Knights approached and laughed loudly. "Ha, you came at the right time. General Baylor, I didn't think that we would meet again because of the Grey Coat Army. I don't want to see you again, General Gary." Pouting his lips, the burly general called Baylor looked at the sinister-looking middle-aged man, who was also wearing high-class general armor, and replied in annoyance. "Is that so? Then who do you want to see? Ralph?" The middle-aged general called Gary had a sinister aura and seemed to be quite shrewd. He didn't show any signs of anger when he heard this. Instead, he spread his hands and said another name. "Ralph. It's a pity that he died in the northern wilderness." Shaking his head, Baylor said firmly, "There's nothing to be pitiful about. This is the highest honor of a warrior. If I can conquer the northern wilderness imperial city with Marshal Z, even if I die on the battlefield, my life won't be in vain." Gary was silent when he heard this. After a while, he nodded slightly. Although he didn't seem to think much of Ralph, he had to admit this statement. At this point, the identities of these 2 people were self-evident. The Mad General of the Thunderbolt's army, Baylor. The Ashen Flame Army, Northern Ashenwolf, Gary. If one added the Silent Eagle of the Zechen Legion, Ralph. They were the 3 famous generals who were sent by the 3 major legions to encircle the Grey Coat Army a few years ago. Of course, the latter Ralph was already dead. Back then, although Z exposed his identity as a spy, he didn't publicize it. Therefore, in the Blank's army, he was only seen as a hero who conquered the northern wilderness imperial city with war god Z and died heroically in battle. Even now, he still enjoyed a very high reputation. After Gary sent someone to negotiate with the garrison, the city gates opened again. The Thunderbolt's army was in front while the Ashen Flame army was behind. They slowly entered the city. When the 2 armies moved, the difference in the scale of their numbers was even more obvious. Gary didn't return to the army. Instead, he rode with Baylor. Looking at the 2,000 cavalry behind them, he squinted his eyes and smiled. "Hee, it seems like your recent situation isn't very good, General Baylor." As a famous general of the Thunderbolt's army, Baylor should have more than 10,000 soldiers under his command. Now that he only brought 2,000 cavalrymen, there was naturally a problem. "Don't worry," Baylor replied stiffly. His expression darkened. When Gary heard this, he smiled and didn't say anything else. They were all mingling at the front lines. Although they didn't belong to the same legion, they had naturally heard about each other's news. This situation happened because Baylor's relationship with the Gray Coat Army was unclear. More accurately, it was because of his relationship with Captain Fry, who was supposed to be dead. Therefore, at this sensitive time, he would naturally be affected. Of course, this topic shouldn't be mentioned again. Otherwise, it was not impossible for them to fall out with each other. When they arrived at the foot of the city, Gary glanced at the soldiers on the city walls who had different auras compared to the garrison troops. He nodded in understanding. "It's the Tiger Roar Legion. Yes, I wonder who is leading them this time?" After pausing for a moment, Ian Vulture narrowed his eyes and looked at a middle-aged officer with an indifferent expression saluting from afar. His military posture was extremely standard. He should have been the one who stopped the chaos on the city walls just now. As if he thought of something, Gary furrowed his eyebrows. This aura. Baylor didn't look at the city walls. Instead, he looked at the soldiers lined up at the city gate to welcome them. They had a cold aura, and they were wearing the silver-white standard armor of the Tiger Roar Legion. Their formation was strict and neat, and there were almost no flaws. He was stunned, and the corners of his mouth twitched. "It can't be that fellow, right?" A bitter smile appeared on Gary's face. "It's hard to say, but I don't feel very good." When they arrived at the foot of the city, an officer in military uniform took a few steps forward and performed a standard military salute. He said concisely, "Welcome, generals, for coming to help. The general has already set up a banquet in the city and has been waiting for you for a long time. Please follow me." Gary's expression was a little strange. He asked, "Who is your general?" "Bretta, General Bretta." He touched his forehead. "I knew it. F***CK. Is it really that arrogant rooster?" Chapter 9:14. Tens of thousands of troops with the iron blood aura of the front lines officially entered the city, but they did not cause any commotion. That was because looking out, one could not see any civilians leaving the city. It was silent and depressing. It was ironic. Shanghai City was an enemy-occupied city. Although they were not as prosperous as before, their liveliness was slowly recovering, and they were no different from normal cities. However, this city, which was completely under the control of Blank's army, was lifeless like a storm was coming. In the most luxurious restaurant in the city, the banquet was already prepared. However, when Below and Gary pushed open the door and entered, they only saw a table full of dishes. They did not see the host who was supposed to be there. Gary frowned unhappily. He looked at the officer who led the way and asked, "Is this what you meant by waiting for a long time?" "I'm sorry, generals." The middle-aged officer bowed apologetically. He tilted his head slightly and looked at the hourglass beside the table. He said calmly, 3 minutes, at most 3 minutes, and the general will come over to welcome you." Below and Gary also looked at the hourglass. It was like they had seen something disgusting, and they grinned. Following which, Below waved his hand expressionlessly. "Forget it, bring us to see Bretta." The middle-aged officer hesitated. "General. Now, immediately, obey the military order." Below's face was dark and gloomy as he said with an oppressive tone. However, just as he said that, the door behind him was pushed open. A sharp laugh that made one uncomfortable spread out. "Haha, long time no see. Crazy General, you are still so impatient." Turning around, he saw a middle-aged man with a feminine and fair complexion. His appearance was neat and tidy, and not even a single strand of hair was out of place. He wore high-grade armor and walked in with a smile. "Of course, because there are always many arrogant people who are late, General Bretta," below said expressionlessly as he casually placed his hand on the other party's outstretched hand. Gary reached out and shook hands with General Breda. However, he did not say anything and only nodded. It was obvious that he did not have a good impression of the other party. Breda did not feel like he was being treated coldly. He picked up the wet towel beside the table and wiped his right hand as if it was stained with some strong poison. When Baylor and Gary, who were seated, saw this, the corners of their eyes twitched. They looked away and felt that their courteous behavior just now was unnecessary. "Let's start then. We'll chat while we eat. The dishes here are pretty good." "Yes, it's clean." After adding this seemingly superfluous sentence, Breton took the hourglass that was about to run out, turned it upside down, and looked up with a smile. "We have 15 minutes. At this moment, Baylor and the other person were speechless. They poured a cup of wine and clinked it with each other. They both felt that the other party, who had not been on good terms with them before, had suddenly become pleasing to the eye. As expected, the friendship between people was based on comparison, although I don't think it's a wise decision to transfer the two of you back from the front line just to deal with the gray-clothed rebels. But since it's a foregone conclusion, we still have to do what we have to do." Hearing that he seemed to have become a useless existence, Baylor could not help but interrupt and mock. "Is that so? Then why did I hear that a few days ago, the Grey Coat Army disguised themselves as members of your Tiger Roar Legion and easily opened the gates of two important military cities, causing the situation to become very passive? That was just an accident. Also, pay attention to your position, General Baylor." With a wave of his hand, the officer standing at the side in an extremely standard military posture stepped forward and handed over a few pieces of paper. Breton wiped the silver cutlery in his hands and said without raising his head, "This is information about our current situation and the strength and movements of the gray-clothed rebels. You can take a look first. Yes, I have to say that on paper, this Grey Coat Army is indeed not to be underestimated, especially at this special moment. However, with two light chuckles, Breton put down the wet towel and looked up at Baylor and the other person who were frowning as they flipped through the information. He said calmly, "They also have a fatal point. Please turn to the last 3 pages." The corners of Baylor and the other person's mouths twitched. They flipped to the last page as they were told and scanned through it. They could not help but be stunned. "This is an assassination report against the current leader of the gray-clothed rebels. Oh, a mage called Josiah. Although the old fellows in the armaments department are a little incompetent, their foresight is not bad. They even know where the gray-clothed rebels' greatest weakness is. Of course, from the looks of it now, none of those insatiable assassins have succeeded." He paused and put a piece of bloody beef into his mouth. After chewing a few times and swallowing, he continued, "Fortunately, they are not completely incompetent. We cannot enter the enemy-occupied area, but they can. They brought back this piece of information and found something interesting. Purple bore cannon? Narom? Interesting. What are you trying to say?" Gary asked with a frown as he flipped through the information in his hand. "It's very simple. I want to say that they have the wrong target." Picking up a wet towel and elegantly wiping the soup from the corner of his mouth, Breton narrowed his eyes and said, "Although that Josiah is the Grey Coat Army's greatest weakness, because of the existence of a powerful being like Narom, all assassination attempts are unable to get close to him. If that's the case, why don't we target Nilahong directly? As long as we kill him, all the problems will be solved." "Nonsense." Waving the information in his hands, Baylor said bluntly, "Do you think those assassins are idiots? If they could kill Narom, why would they wait until now? Why would they fall into the hands of hundreds of people?" Breton smiled and shook his finger. No. You misunderstood. In fact, my real target is only the purple bore cannon. If it is really as described in the information, this weapon can change the current pattern of war, and even the structure of power. This is also the reason why I volunteered to come over this time. As for the others like the Grey Coat Army, Josiah, Naram, and so on, they are all secondary. Nonsense. Wait until you kill that Naram first. Baylor curled his lips in disdain. On the side, Gary raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He quickly flipped through the paper and searched for the information about the purple bore cannon that Breton had given the highest evaluation of. Whether or not I'm boasting, we will know after a while. Breton smiled faintly and said, I think you all understand my style of doing things. Yes, although as an army general, I must always remember the importance of the team and the whole. I actually admire powerful people with fighting aura. The more powerful they are, the more useful they are. Of course, it will be more troublesome after they become enemies. However, this is just a comparison. Just as I often say, everything can be calculated, from the major things like victory or defeat in a war to the minor things like victory or defeat in a game of cards. The only difference is the price to pay. I'm looking forward to it. How much does it cost to kill that Naram? I hope it doesn't make me too hopeful. This time, Baylor did not retort. This was because he was pulled by Gary to look at the information about the purple bore cannon. He frowned slightly with a serious expression. Everyone present was a ruthless person who had been on the battlefield for half their lives. Naturally, their judgment of war weapons would not be too bad. Furthermore, with just a cursory look, they knew that Breton was not lying. The power of this weapon, called the purple bore cannon, was enough to make any power excited. Breton seemed to have expected such a reaction. He calmly ate the food in front of him and did not disturb them. After a moment of silence in the room, Baylor and Gary raised their heads at the same time. They took a slight breath and asked solemnly, Is the information true? Yes, but we'll talk about this later. Putting down his knife and fork, Breton once again picked up a wet towel to wipe the corners of his mouth. He then picked up a cup of tea to rinse his mouth 3 times before continuing. According to the information, Josiah and Naram are currently in the battle zone at the front. I don't know if I should say that they are stupid or praise their courage. Alright, no matter what, this is an excellent opportunity for us to deal with the Grey Coat rebels with one fatal blow. Therefore, for now, let us first discuss the issue of who will be leading the army in this battle. Baylor and Gary looked at each other when they heard this. They both frowned and then looked at Breton, waiting for him to continue speaking. My opinion is very simple. I have full authority to formulate the battle plan this time. Our army will also be in charge of the actual battle operations. Of course. Just as Baylor and Gary's expressions became more and more gloomy, Breton seemed to have finally thought of these 2 generals who had rushed back from the front lines. He said sincerely, The 2 generals have spared no effort in coming here to help. Of course, my army will accept this friendship. In my plan, the 2 generals can lead the soldiers under your command to assist from the side. Yes, assist according to the plan. Bang! There was a loud bang and the bowls and plates shook. Baylor's face darkened as he retracted his hand from the table. He roared angrily, What nonsense are you talking about? Assist? Don't King think that we don't know the plan of this arrogant rooster. We definitely won't accept this plan. General Breton, don't you think that your suggestion is a bit too much? Gary, who was on the side, also had an extremely unpleasant expression. He squinted his eyes and spoke in a neutral tone. Oh, sorry. You heard wrong. Breton spread out his hands and said calmly, This is not a suggestion, but an opinion. Now you have 2 choices. The first is to act according to my plan. The second is that I will send someone to treat the 2 of you well. When this battle is over, I will send a letter of gratitude to your army. Pause for a while. He waved his hand and continued, Don't be in a hurry to get angry, General Baylor. I'm sorry that I have investigated your matter. This time, our enemy is the Grey Coat Army. So, you know that I have sufficient reasons to not let you near the battle zone. As for General Gary, you have led a large force this time, but this is the territory of my Tiger Roar army. Believe me, I have no less than 10 ways to make it difficult for your army to move an inch here. See, this is the charm of planning beforehand." After he finished speaking, he nodded apologetically to Baylor and Gary, whose expressions were extremely unpleasant. He stood up and picked up the hourglass that had just finished dripping. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. 15 minutes. The meal time is over. Next, it's time to work. Please continue with your meal. There's no need to accompany you. Oh, right. As if he had thought of something, Breton once again took out a slightly larger hourglass from his pocket and placed it on the table. "If the two of you have made a decision, you can come to the mayor's mansion to find me after the hourglass has finished dripping." "Yes, you know my habit. I won't wait for you if you're late." He nodded again and was about to leave the room with his subordinate officers. "Wait." Baylor squinted his eyes and looked at Breton, who had turned his head in surprise at the door. He said sarcastically, "I'm very curious. When you do that with a woman, do you also put an hourglass beside you? 5 minutes? Or 10 minutes? When Gary heard this, he instantly laughed softly. Although these words were really rude, it had to be said that it did indeed make his depressed mood much better. He also asked, "Yes, I'm also very curious." Impudent. When the officer at the side heard this, his expression immediately darkened. He wanted to reprimand something, but he was stopped by Breton's hand. His expression did not change, and he said calmly, "If that time really comes, I will put an hourglass. But a woman? Why do I have to touch such a dirty thing?" "You win. Tell me about your plan." Chapter 9:15. P.S. There's a power outage in my hometown, so I can't write smoothly. However, Raccoon is a good person, and he does what he says. Carrot, praise me, quickly praise me. A few days later, the people who came from the front line did not affect the Greycoat Army's offensive. Once the two cities of Hanshui and Kusi were lost, the Blank's army had no place to defend within 100 miles. They could only watch as the Greycoat Army attacked from multiple fronts, as if they were entering a place with no one around. They could only sigh helplessly. At this point in time, whether they admitted it or not, the Greycoat Army had indeed become a huge problem for the Bran. This problem was not only reflected in its influence, but more troublesome in its military geographical location. The 100,000 mountains were close to the Bran's front line. If this area was lost, the Greycoat Army would attack from 4 fronts, and the Bran's connection with the front line would be cut off. Not to mention the problem of supplies, it was unknown whether the isolated front line could withstand the attacks of the barbarians in the northern wilderness. This was not a sensational news. The Greycoat Army did not know, but the Bran's army knew very well that their old rival in the north was not peaceful recently. Of course, this had nothing to do with Tang En, who was leisurely strolling around the war zone. According to the original schedule, they should have arrived at the combat unit and met up with Fry, but for some reason, Tang En was not in a hurry to contact Fry. Instead, he continued to wander aimlessly with Josiah, teasing the assassins who came to seek death from time to time. It could be said that they were very relaxed. In the afternoon, on the official road, in a carriage that was moving slowly. "So, you mean to persuade Baylor to surrender? Are you confident?" After watching Tang En's mysterious actions for a few days, Josiah finally could not hold back his curiosity. He stopped Tang En, who was going out with the letter, and asked for the reason. After knowing Tang En's plan, Josiah was instantly excited. Now that the morale of the Greycoat Army was high and they had the purple bore cannons in their hands, they could be said to be invincible and seemed to have no flaws. However, as the leader, Josiah knew very well that this was only on the surface. In fact, the Greycoat Army had a flaw, and it was not a small one. It was the lack of professional officers and generals at all levels. This problem had always existed, and it was very difficult to change it. To put it bluntly, this was the limitation of a civilian rebellion. Although some things were uncomfortable to say, it was the truth. The nobles who had received professional education were much more knowledgeable than the poor commoners. Most of them were also of higher quality. The Grey Coat Army's main body was made up of commoners, which determined that they had a strong ambition to rebel. However, at the same time, they lacked the necessary conditions, such as senior generals with mature military training. This was especially so after they were stabbed in the back by the brand last year. Many officers who were trained with great difficulty died at the front lines because of this, which made the Grey Coat Army situation even more difficult. It was also because of this that Josiah was overjoyed when he heard that he might be able to obtain a veteran general. He could not wait to ask about the possibility of success. Idiot, whether I am confident or not, we will only know after we try. Tapping the tip of Josiah's nose, Tang En waved the letter in his hand. This is a letter written to Brother Fry. With their decades of friendship, the success rate should be much higher if we ask him to come forward. That's it? What about the rest? Will it be better if I express my attitude again? Josiah was a little worried about personal gains and losses. Tang En shook his head. I have already sent Harry and the others to make the other preparations. It is not suitable for you to come forward now. You might go too far. Well, it won't be too late for you to come forward when Baylor really comes to the Grey Coat Army. Oh! Josiah heard this and knew that he was anxious. He did not have any friendship with Baylor. If he came forward, Baylor would definitely feel betrayed. However, it was different for Fry and the others. They could persuade him through friendship. This would make him feel much better psychologically. Then what are you waiting for? Send a letter to Brother Fry now. After thinking this through, Josiah began to urge him enthusiastically again. Tang En pointed helplessly at the door behind Josiah. I was just about to do it. You have to let me go out and get someone to deliver the letter first. Josiah stuck out his tongue in embarrassment and left the carriage. This place was not far from where Fry and the others were. If they were fast, they would receive a reply in the morning. Naturally, they did not need David to deliver the letter. In the end, Victor found 2 quick-witted guards and prepared a few good horses to set off immediately. After making the arrangements, Tang En asked casually, Right, Brother Victor, where are we now? Mr. Nilahong, at our current speed, we will arrive at Piak City in the evening after another 2 hours of travel. Victor's attitude changed from a few days ago as he replied very politely. Piak City? Oh, I have some impression of it. It is a small city, right? Well, let's camp and rest there tonight. Okay, sir. Victor seemed to want to say something, but he looked at Tang En and Josiah, who turned around and left. In the end, he did not say anything. Piak City was indeed an unknown small city, but its geographical location was very close to the front lines. There was a certain amount of hidden danger. If it was before, Victor would definitely strongly object to resting and camping there. But now, not to mention whether the constantly defeated Blank's army could pass through the war zone, even if they did, with this man here, there shouldn't be any problems. That's right. After Josiah intentionally or unintentionally reminded him a few days ago, Victor had already guessed the identity of Tang En and David. Needless to say, he was shocked. Since then, Victor was greatly relieved. At the same time, he let go of the entanglement in his heart. It was not shameful to lose to the legendary Gray Space. At the same time, he was no longer worried about Josiah's safety. Whatever Tang En said, he would just do it in the evening. Compared to the leisurely atmosphere on Tang En's side, the command center of the Gray Space Army was very busy. However, the atmosphere was quite good. From time to time, there would be big and small news of victory, which made the busy faces filled with joy. As mentioned earlier, due to the lack of mature officers at all levels, The existing senior officers could only take on most of the responsibilities. They tried their best to refine and simplify the general's orders and distribute them to the troops at all levels. This was so that the low-level officers who did not have a high degree of education could quickly understand the meaning of the orders. And to achieve this, it was undoubtedly not easy. Especially Fry, who was a future marshal. He was very clear about his ability and what he was carrying on his shoulders. Therefore, even though he had not rested for a few days, and his eyes were bloodshot, he still sat in the middle of the army and did not leave. Fry knew that he had missed the best opportunity to learn. The more than 10 years in the mine actually closed the door for him to continue to improve in the field of military affairs. What he could do now was to use hard work to make up for his lack of talent and force himself to knock on that dusty door and try his best to improve a little, even if it was just a little. It was also because of this demon-like state that after he heard Baylor's familiar name, he calmed down for a while before he reacted. He hurriedly read the contents of the letter again, and the corners of his mouth gradually curled up. He suddenly slammed the table with a bang and shouted excitedly, "Someone, go and summon Skinny Monkey, Bamboo Pole, Big Bear, cough cough." Under the confused gaze of the messenger, Fry awkwardly coughed a few times and continued, "Go and inform Sir Nate, Rex, and the others of the 6th Army that it is my order and ask them to come over immediately." Without a doubt, Fry thought of the same thing as Josiah. He attached great importance to persuading Baylor, his old brother, to join the Gray Space Army. If it were not for the fact that he could not leave, he really wanted to personally go and invite Baylor. However, this was not a big problem. The effect would be about the same if he brought a handwritten letter over. Yes, with Skinny Monkey and a group of old brothers, the chances would be even higher, thinking that after more than 10 years, the surviving old brothers of the Spear Formation breaking team could once again fight side by side. Fry was even more delighted. However, at this moment, the messenger who had just left with the order was knocked back by a hurried figure at the curtain. After hurriedly helping the messenger up and apologizing, the officer who rushed in shouted loudly, "Oh, sorry. Sir General, there is an urgent military report." Hearing this, Fray's expression immediately became serious. "Speak." "There is news from the 3 armies. Dozens of miles ahead of their main forces, there is a large group of Tiger Roar Legion cavalry attacking. There is also news from the right wing of the other 4 armies. There is also a large group of Tiger Roar Legion cavalry advancing at high speed towards their position." "What? Are you sure it is all cavalry?" Seeing the officer nod solemnly, Fry took a slight breath and suppressed the shock in his heart. He said in a deep voice, "Go, gather all the generals and higher-ups to discuss this quickly." Yes. Outside the tent of the Central Army, the night was silent and deep. Other than the piles of bonfires for illumination, the wilderness had long been shrouded in darkness. Squinting, one could see that there was still a faint moist mist mixed in. It seemed like there was an undercurrent that was constantly churning and could erupt at any moment. Chapter 9:16. It was early in the morning, and the sun had yet to rise. Look, commoners are still commoners. Their inferior habits have been deeply ingrained in their bones. Even if they have the ability to stir up trouble, they can't change their habit of fighting on foot. On the mound, Bretta stood straight in the chilly night wind that had yet to dissipate. He pointed at the gray-coat army soldiers who had been distracted by the cavalry and said calmly, "Therefore, we only need to send a large number of mounted archers to harass them. They won't be able to fight or catch up to them. They will be at a loss for a short period of time. They really lack a challenge." He smiled and shook his head. He didn't think much of it. However, before he finished speaking, suddenly, there was a series of violent explosions in the distance. The mounted archers who had been fighting and moving suddenly flashed in all directions. They were thrown off their horses, and they were in a sorry state. Even from such a distance, it could be seen that the cavalry had suffered heavy losses. Breda paused. Under the mocking gazes of Baylor and Gary, the corners of his eyes twitched. Then, he exhaled and said with a calm expression, "Of course, these purple cannons are good stuff." Although it was awkward to be slapped in the face, it had to be said that Breda's evaluation just now was very reasonable. The current troop system of the Grey Coat Army was indeed not mature. In particular, they lacked the essential cavalry. This also restricted their tactical changes. Fry and the rest were naturally aware of this problem, but it was almost impossible to solve it. The reason was simple. There were no horses. These horses were not ordinary horses. They were well-trained war horses. These were strategic resources in Bran. Even if one had money, they might not be able to buy them, let alone buy them on a large scale. In the past, the Grey Coat Army also lacked war horses. However, after more than 10 years of accumulation, they still had a few cavalry brigades that were organized. However, after the City of Dawn was destroyed, they retreated to the harsh environment and narrow mountain road. The war horses could not travel at all. They had no choice but to abandon them. Now that they were out, it was naturally impossible for them to be organized into cavalry units. The drawbacks of the lack of cavalry had not been revealed in the previous siege battles. However, they were completely exposed in this field battle. The cavalry came and went like the wind, and the infantry naturally could not catch up to them. Just like now, if not for the fact that the range of the purple bore cannons was much longer than that of the bows and arrows, causing the mounted archers to not dare to get too close, the Grey Coat Army would be in an even more difficult situation. Of course, this didn't mean that the Grey Coat Army had no future and was doomed to fail. The sudden appearance of the purple bore cannons could change the current situation of the war. This was not just a saying. Although the Grey Coat Army didn't have cavalry, they had purple cannons with medium range. From a certain point of view, they could counter cavalry. This could be verified by the fact that Z had led his army to launch a surprise attack from thousands of miles away and had chased the Wilderness Wolf Cavaliers away like dogs. He had successfully rushed to the foot of the Imperial City in the northern wilderness. However, this was the first time they had encountered a large-scale cavalry battle in the field, and the situation had been like this all night. The cavalry of the Tiger Roar Army attacked everywhere, like headless flies or maggots in the bones, constantly attacking the defensive area of the Grey Coat Army. It was as if they had gone crazy, and it was really confusing. The Grey Cloth Army was obviously not prepared for this. Although most of them had chased away the enemy's cavalry like this, which was considered a victory that was neither big nor small, they were completely unaware of the enemy's true goal. This was the thousands of elite cavalry hidden behind the inconspicuous hills. Okay, 6:00 in the morning. The last line of defense, break through. Looking at the Grey Coat soldiers who were gradually disappearing into the distance, Breda touched the hourglass in his hand. The slightly protruding corners of his mouth were slightly raised, revealing a confident expression that everything was under his control. He really looked like an arrogant duke. Seeing this, Luo curled his lips and asked impatiently, "Okay, after wandering around for the whole night, can you tell us your complete plan now? What should we do?" "Wrong, it's not you, it's just me," Breda said with a chuckle. "According to the previous agreement, you can only assist from the side. Now, the battlefield is everywhere within a radius of 100 miles. If you two are itching to fight, you can lead the troops and fight yourselves. I won't interfere. Well, good luck to you. F*CKU. Even though Gary was quite shrewd, when he heard this, he couldn't help but clench his fists when he knew that he had led the troops to move around for the whole night in vain. With great difficulty, he resisted the strong impulse to punch this arrogant rooster's clean face that didn't have a trace of dust. He secretly gritted his teeth and said in a muffled voice, "What about you? Where are you going?" "It's not time to reveal the real mystery of the plan yet." "Well, since you two want to know so much, there's no harm in telling you. Looking at Baylor and Gary, who were obviously on the verge of going berserk, Bretta shrugged and pointed to the mountain in front of them. In 15 minutes, go around this mountain, and you will see a small city called Pia. The leader of the Grey Coat Army has been staying there since last night and hasn't moved. Are you sure about the authenticity of this information? Gary was stunned when he heard this. His face was full of doubt. One had to know that this was an area occupied by the enemy. It was easy to imagine how difficult it was to obtain real-time information, not to mention just one night. Haha, I know what you want to ask. Well, do you know what my biggest gain in the South is after being away from the front lines for so many years? It's not knowing those so-called big shots with big bellies who claim to be elegant but are actually extremely dirty. Instead, I spent a lot of time understanding knowledge that I used to think was unorthodox, such as alchemy and magic. Baylor waved his hand and interrupted him in an extremely irritated manner. If you have something to say, say it. You're not trying to tell us that you've become a magician, are you? Of course it's impossible to become a magician, but it's not a problem to borrow some magic items. Bretta waved his hand behind him indifferently. A few soldiers behind him carefully carried over something that looked like a wooden cabinet. Other than the top, which didn't have a cover, the four sides of the wooden cabinet were tightly sealed. They stuck their heads out to take a look. Inside the wooden cabinet, there was a stone slab that was filled with mysterious patterns. At first glance, it looked like a ghost face. There were also thin crystal pillars of different lengths on the stone slab. They were glued together to form a strange hollow tower model. As a whole, it looked very strange. What is this? Baylor and Gary looked at each other blankly. They knew nothing about this item that was clearly in the category of magic. A sound transmission spell formation. This time, Bretta did not keep them in suspense. He simply said the name of this ancient monster. Then, he took out a blue prismatic crystal and pressed it into the groove of the stone slab. Baylor and Gary recognized this item. It was an expensive magic stone. When the sorcerer's stone was completely embedded into the runic slate, the mysterious patterns suddenly lit up. Streams of blue water followed the patterns and gathered towards the crystal pagoda. In an instant, the tip of the crystal pagoda blossomed with a resplendent light like a diamond. At this moment, Bretta leaned over the top of the wooden cabinet and asked calmly, "What's the situation now?" "General, everything is normal." Under Baylor and Gary's stunned gazes, an emotionless and slightly awkward voice suddenly appeared out of thin air. Because they were close, they could obviously tell that this voice had come from the crystal tower. After a pause, he said, "They are still in the hotel in the west of the city and have not come out. They should not be awake yet. Continue to monitor them. If there are any changes, report them immediately." "Yes, General." Bretta straightened his body and looked at Baylor and Gary's shocked expressions. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Don't you think it's very magical? This is the power of magic. As long as two sound transmission spell formations are set up, they can communicate with each other in real time. Of course, the sound will be slightly distorted, and the distance cannot be too far. The consumption is also quite high. This magic stone can only last for about 10 minutes, but this is not important, right? The other party is now in the city. Yes, I hope I won't disturb their sleep when I go over. After all, this is their last sleep. What Baylor could not stand the most was Bretta's arrogant attitude, as if everything was going according to his plan. When he heard this, he was shocked, but on the surface, he still said disdainfully, "It's just a small trick. Even if you know that the other party is in the city, what can you do? You can enter, but can you guarantee that you can retreat in time? You must know that this is the territory of the Grey Coat Army. There are soldiers of the Grey Coat Army everywhere. Be careful not to be cut off by them and be surrounded to death in the city." You don't have to worry about this. You know that I never do things that I am not confident in. Breda shook his head and laughed. He held the hourglass and said mysteriously, "Everything can be calculated. Do you think that the soldiers of the Grey Coat Army can still get close to this place? P.S. Nonsense is not money. At noon, the neighbor's old man passed away. He was around 80 years old and died of natural causes. In my hometown, this is considered a happy funeral. Therefore, we invited a band to play gongs and drums non-stop until the wee hours of the morning. Civet's habit of writing is that he cannot be disturbed. Usually, when there is no one around, he will close the door and windows. Today, when he heard the music, his ears were filled with the cadence of Swona, also seems to be a trumpet, but I am not sure. His mind was blank, and he had no thoughts at all. So, sorry, there is only one chapter today. Chapter 9:17. Where is it? Where is it? There's no reason for such a big movement, it can't be just for a chaotic battle. Damn it! Where is the target of this bunch of bastards? In the Grey Coat Army headquarters, the not-so-small space was packed to the brim. With the simple wooden table with the military map as the center, the frowning faces of high-ranking officers, generals, and so on filled the room. The atmosphere was stifling. To be honest, if a Mjolnir of Mjolnir came crashing down, the Grey Coat Army, which had more than 100,000 soldiers, would immediately be paralyzed. In the center of the crowd, next to the wooden table, several generals led by Fry stared at the map on the table with bloodshot eyes, as if they were trying to find something from the messy lines on the map. Unfortunately, they had not found anything so far. The Tiger Roar Army had attacked all night and turned the area within 100 miles into a pot of porridge. Fry and the others would never believe that there was nothing fishy about this. Years of bloody battles had already trained them to have a beast-like instinct for danger. They dared to pat their chests and guarantee that there was definitely something fishy going on. But what was frustrating was that they could not find it at all. Fry looked away and looked up at the officer in charge of intelligence collection. He asked in a low voice, "Haven't you found the enemy's commander?" Now they could confirm that the other party was definitely from the Tiger Roar Army, but because the change happened so suddenly, they did not know which general of the Tiger Roar Army was in command of this battle. This was very important. With the accumulation of intelligence here and Fry and the others' understanding of Blank's army, as long as they knew the identity and name of the enemy's commander, they would have some understanding. They would not have to make wild guesses like now. Not yet. They are trying to track it down, the officer replied, wiping the cold sweat on his forehead. As for them, they were naturally referring to the secret organization. Although very disappointed, Fry was not a person who did not know right from wrong. He nodded lightly and did not pursue the responsibility of this officer. Just as the atmosphere in the headquarters became more and more solemn, an excited voice suddenly came from outside. "Sorry, Captain, that group of bastards is like crazy. We came late, but you said that crazy Baylor. And why are there so many people? What are they all gathered here for?" Those who could call Fry Captain were naturally Skinny Monkey and other old brothers of the former Long Spear Formation breaking team. They couldn't change the habit of calling Fry Captain. The crowd dispersed. Sure enough, it was Shoho, De Xiong, and the others. They were looking around in confusion. He must have just come back from the battlefield, and his whole body was covered with the smell of blood that could not be concealed. In fact, they had already received the news last night. They should have come earlier. It was only because of the sudden appearance of the Tiger Roar Legion soldiers that they were able to escape. Fry raised his head and was also stunned. Only then did he remember that he had sent someone to inform Skinny Monkey and the others to write a letter to Bela last night. He shook his head. Now was not the time to talk about this. Just as he was about to wave his hand and ask them to step aside, a voice suddenly rang out. Suddenly, His arm stopped in midair, and his expression changed indeterminately. "Captain, bang!" Fry slammed his palm on the table, breaking a corner of the wooden table. He shouted angrily, "Guards! Where's the man who delivered the letter last night? Bring it to me." "A letter? What letter?" Shoho and the others were startled when they saw this. They couldn't help but turn their heads and ask in confusion. The surrounding people looked at each other, their faces full of confusion. "It's too late, damn it! Quick! Get him here, quick!" Fry seemed to have thought of something. He clapped his hands and walked around quickly, his face full of anxiety. The so-called letter was, of course, the letter that Tang En had sent to Fry to discuss and persuade Baylor to surrender. The person who delivered the letter was a guard. He did not receive a reply from Fry and naturally did not return. Now that he heard the summons, he immediately rushed over. Waving his hand to stop the guard's military salute, Fry asked anxiously, "Leader, where are they now? Point it out on the map for me." It's here. The team was here when I came." The guard was stunned for a moment and looked up and down. He quickly pointed at a certain place on the map and said, "Piak City, found it. That's right, it's Piak City." Looking at the marching lines and the location of the battle on the map, Fry smashed his fist on the sign of Piak City. His tone was agitated, but his face was pale. The surrounding high-ranking generals were stunned when they saw this. Then, their expressions suddenly changed. "Wait, you mean the other party's target is the leader and the others, and the chaotic battle just now was just to confuse our line of sight?" After saying this, there was a whoosh, and the command center was instantly in a mess. F***CK. So that's how it is. These bastards are really F***Kingvicious. Then what are we waiting for? Quickly send troops to rescue the leader and the others. Calm down, everyone, calm down. Piak City is the territory of the three armies. I remember that there are many soldiers outside. It shouldn't be so easy to break through. We still have time. No matter if we have time or not, we have to send people to rescue them now. There was no need to say more about Josiah's significance to the Gray Coat Army. Everyone present knew in their hearts. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they would rather lose an entire army than let anything happen to Josiah. Now that they heard that Josiah might be in great danger, they immediately quarreled and anxiously came up with all kinds of ideas. "Quiet, quiet. Shut up." Suddenly, thunder roared. Frey's face was gloomy as he looked around. Under the deterrence of his power, he instantly suppressed all kinds of quarrels. Then, he lowered his head to look at the military map and frowned. There was a hint of bitterness at the corner of his mouth as he muttered in a low voice, "Rescue? I'm afraid it's not that simple." He took a slight breath and waved his hand to order. "Come, bring me all the information from the three armies. Also, conscript all the war horses in the scout camp. Once they receive the order, they will set off immediately." "Yes." A few officers heard this and hurriedly squeezed through the crowd and left without saluting. As mentioned before, the Gray Coat Army was extremely short of well-trained war horses. Even most of the high-ranking officers traveled on foot like ordinary soldiers. The few war horses were gathered in the scout camp for the scouts' necessary reconnaissance. But the current situation was critical. The Gray Coat Army was facing the biggest danger since they left the Shirwan Mountains. Naturally, they couldn't care about anything else. But before the simple task of gathering the war horses was completed, the complicated and trivial information aspect was a step ahead of them. "Found it, General." It was the same officer who was in charge of collecting information. But now there were more sweat on his forehead, dripping like rain. "This is the information that the three armies just sent. There are indeed 2 regiments of soldiers stationed outside Pia City. Half an hour ago, they were ambushed by a large group of cavalry. After repelling the enemy, they chased after them. As a result, when they returned to the defensive area, They were blocked at the entrance of the canyon and are waiting for orders from above. Wait my ass. Blocked? Don't they have the purple bore cannons? Hit them back. Skinny Monkey was anxious when he heard this. He slammed the table and roared. Fry frowned when he heard this. Although the troops were not allowed to act on their own in war, this kind of encounter was an exception. If they had to ask for instructions, then there was no need to fight. Pausing, the officer wiped off the sweat on his forehead. The situation is a little special. The cavalry only blocked one end of the canyon, and the ones blocking the canyon are thousands of normal civilians. Skinny Monkey's face was filled with disbelief. Normal civilians. How is that possible? Why would there be so many civilians running there, eh? He paused for a moment, as if he had thought of something, and his expression suddenly changed. No way. Is this still AF * King Bulan's soldier? Fry lowered his head and looked at the numerous farms around Pia City. His face was ugly to the extreme. After a short while, he sighed. So vicious. The command center was totally silent. The officers weren't fools, and when they understood, they gritted their teeth and clenched their fists. Instantly, they were furious to the breaking point. Just like Shanghai City, as long as the Gray Coat Army occupied a place, they wouldn't disturb the civilians. Therefore, it was impossible for ordinary civilians to run into the canyon for no reason. Furthermore, it was a gathering of more than 1,000 people from several villages. Obviously, such a situation could only be caused by the Blank's army. Their goal was simple: to chase the civilians to block the canyon. The two groups of Gray Coat Army soldiers wouldn't act rashly and wouldn't attack the civilians. As such, they wouldn't be able to rush back to the defensive region to defend Pia City. One had to say that this move was vicious, and it was aimed at the weakness of the Gray Coat Army. Not to mention the principles of helping the people, but to talk about the actual situation, the Gray Coat Army being able to develop to such a scale had a lot to do with the civilians. They couldn't do anything to the civilians. If they did, the reputation and faith that the Gray Coat Army had built up over decades would crumble, but if they didn't give the order to attack, Josiah would be in danger. To be honest, this was an ironic scene. The Gray Coat Army's position was to save the civilians, but now they had to face such a difficult choice. On the other hand, the Bran Army's goal was to protect the Bran civilians, but now they were pushing them to the edge of a cliff. Ping ping ping. Bastard, bastard, bastard. An officer leaning on the table looked down and subconsciously punched the table. He cursed in a low voice. His expression was anxious, helpless, angry, and lost. How should they choose? On the hill. You're saying that you've already sent people to chase all the civilians over to block the canyon and not let the Gray Coat Army soldiers pass, forcing them to not attack? Even though he got the explanation from Bretta, Gary couldn't help but confirm it again. He opened his mouth and said in shock and anger, "This is a serious violation of military discipline. Aren't you afraid of going to the military court?" Going to the military court? Why? Just because I've safely moved the civilians out? Bretta's mouth curled up and revealed a confident smile. Do you think the Gray Coat Army will attack the civilians? Haha, don't worry, they won't. Whether it's hypocrisy or sincerity, the civilians are their foundation and source of power. They're also their weakness. They won't destroy everything just to win a local battle. Even if they know that my target is their leader, it's still the same. After a pause, he spread his hands and said, "The limit they can do is to go around the canyon or send reinforcements from other places. In this case, we'll have about an hour to enter the city and kill Nilahong and Josiah. That's enough time. Look, in the end, my mission will be completed and the civilians won't be harmed. Who will send me to the military court? There's no medal to receive there, haha. You really did come up with a good plan." Looking at Bretta's arrogant expression, as if everything was under his control, Gary couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart even though he was quite shrewd. He had heard of Breda a long time ago. He also knew that he had a perverted obsession with cleanliness, punctuality, and saw his own plans as everything. However, after seeing it for himself, Gary still felt that the rumors were somewhat untrue. How was this a freak? He was clearly an unscrupulous madman. Of course. Thank you, this is the highest praise you can give me. Breda bowed elegantly. It seemed that he didn't hear the hidden sarcasm in Gary's words and directly accepted it as a compliment. Then, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and subconsciously looked at the sound transmission array. Just now, there seemed to be some noise coming from it. He leaned over and asked, "What's wrong?" Before he could finish his sentence, whoosh, a strong wind suddenly blew beside his ear. He subconsciously leaned to the side. With a bang, Breda's body instantly flew out. "You motherf asterisk cur." Baylor clenched his fist. His face was pale and cold as he roared angrily, using civilians as bargaining chips. "Are you still a motherf asterisk cur from the Bran? Are you worthy? The military court can't do anything to you. Today I'll kill you first, you scoundrel." After he finished speaking, he chased after Breda with large strides. Gary saw this and opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't reach out his hand to stop him. However, Baylor couldn't continue to beat Breda up. This was because he had only taken a few steps forward when a figure suddenly appeared between the two of them and easily received Baylor's fist. "Enough, General Baylor, please pay attention to your position." This was an expressionless middle-aged man. He was also wearing the silver-white armor of the Tiger Roar Legion. He looked ordinary, but the aura he exuded was not something that an ordinary soldier could compare to. Baylor himself was a high-level warrior, but when he landed a heavy punch, it was as if he had hit cotton. It was weak and couldn't bear the force. Very obviously, this was an expert, and an expert in the military. However, Baylor acted as if he didn't feel anything and scolded angrily, "Get out of my way. Do you have the right to speak here? Get lost." Strength was one thing, but the military paid more attention to military rank and status. Baylor was the general of an army. Only Breda and Gary could be his equal here, so he didn't care about this expert in the military at all. When the middle-aged man heard this, he frowned and looked a little hesitant. "It's fine. Get out of my way, Fitch." Breda shook his head and stood up. He took out a white handkerchief and wiped the blood at the corner of his mouth. He had still been too slow to dodge just now. He avoided his face, but his chin was hit squarely. After this middle-aged man called Fitch responded and retreated, Breda casually threw away the blood-stained white handkerchief and walked in front of Baylor. He looked at Baylor's furious expression and suddenly smiled. "Villain? Haha, you're right. I'm indeed not a good person. However, war also loves good food. He takes away good people and leaves behind bad people. Therefore, as long as I enter the battlefield, I've always considered myself a bad person. Don't you know this?" The corner of Baylor's mouth twitched. He was too lazy to talk nonsense and moved his fist again. "However, at this moment, how do I use this thing? Can I just say it directly?" "Oh, thank you." Clap, clap, clap. That brother just now said it well. "I'm also a bad person. When you have time, let's have an exchange." The emotionless words mixed with the sound of clapping suddenly appeared beside the ears of everyone present. After a moment of silence, Breda was the first to react. He frowned. Of course, he was extremely clear about the source of this unique sound. He walked around Baylor and came to the side of the sound transmission magic array. He took a slight breath and said calmly, "It seems that I still underestimated you. I was actually discovered. However, this is also good. It has become interesting. Yes, you have 15 minutes to prepare to escape. I hope that you can last a little longer because of this. Don't disappoint me too much." That's right. The sound just now had come from the sound transmission magic array. Of course, the person who was talking now was no longer Breda's subordinate. It was very likely that it was the target of their operation this time. Haha, all right. Come, I'll wait for you. It was clearly an extremely relaxed laughter, but when it was transmitted, it became a cold, mechanical voice. Friendly request for instructions. I'm a great villain. Therefore be careful. According to your theory just now, you will die in my hands. I'm looking forward to it, Bretta replied expressionlessly. On the side, Gary couldn't hold himself back. He walked over with a frown and shouted angrily, "Who are you? Hello. The user you are calling is currently busy. Please dial again later." Sorry. The user wrote you dialed Espizino, please redial it her. After a while, he said. What do you mean? Grey Coat Army, Middle Army Headquarters. After a long silence, Fry looked at the officers and generals around him, who were struggling. He slowly got up and calmly said, "Pass down the order. All troops within a radius of 30 miles around Piak City are to rush to the rescue. In addition, the soldiers of the 3 armies and 2 regiments stay where they are. They must ensure the safety of the thousands of people in the valley. General, do as I say. Stop, skinny monkey." Fry suddenly raised his voice. His sharp eyes stared at Skinny Monkey, who was slowly moving to the door. He firmly shook his head and said, "Come back, I don't want to tie you up. Captain, just let me go." Skinny Monkey saw that his intention was seen through. He looked straight into Fray's eyes and begged. The situation now was very clear. He could either ignore the thousands of people and rush to Piak City to protect Josiah at the fastest speed. Or he could ignore Josiah's safety and wait to see what happened to protect the thousands of people. The latter was Fray's choice. It was also the most in line with the principles of the Grey Coat Army. But if something went wrong and something happened to Josiah, Fry would have to bear the responsibility alone. He would have to pay with his life. Skinny Monkey didn't want to do that. He chose the former. If he led the people to rush into the valley, even if there were casualties among the thousands of people, he would be the only one to bear the responsibility. It would have nothing to do with the others. Still shaking his head, Fry said calmly, "What do you think, if the person standing here today was Leader Josiah, what choice would she make?" Everyone was silent. There was no doubt that Leader Josiah would definitely choose the latter. But Skinny Monkey was still unwilling and wanted to say something. Fry waved his hand and interrupted him. The corner of his mouth rose. He smiled and said softly, "Haha, don't worry. Don't forget, he is beside Leader." Chapter 9:18. This thing is called a sound transmission formation? It was accidentally invented by a low-level mage 100 years ago. Normal people usually use letters to communicate when they are in different places. Mages would also use letters, but those are magic letters, letters made from special materials that can store sound. That low-level mage felt that it was inconvenient and wanted to invent a special letter that could communicate instantly. In the end, he made this sound transmission formation. "Isn't that a phone?" Phone? What's that?" He rubbed his nose. "Oh, nothing, continue." "It's more or less like that. This is a rather unpopular magic invention. Although it seems convenient, there are actually many restrictions. The biggest flaw is the distance. Once the distance is too long, more than 3 to 5 miles, the sound can't be transmitted. As such, if they wanted to communicate over long distances, they would have to set up a voice transmission spell formation several kilometers away from each other to serve as a relay. But this way, the cost will be high, and the loss will outweigh the gain. Understood, it's just that the signal can't reach. Signal? You're saying things I don't understand. Hee. Ever since they left Shanghai City, the team had been under surveillance. Most of them were assassins looking for an opportunity, so Tang En and the others didn't care. As long as they didn't get too close, they would treat them as if they didn't exist. If they stepped into the warning line, David and the others would take care of them. However, after entering Pia City, David and the others noticed that there was a group of people who looked like scouts, so they paid attention to them. After some investigation, they finally found traces of the other party in the house opposite the hotel, which was where they were now, and captured him in one fell swoop. And they had hooked a big fish. "Boss, it's a scout from the Tiger Roar Legion." Pushing the door open, David, who was still exuding a murderous aura, said directly, "The enemy's general is called Breda. He's outside the city now and is coming for us. I didn't get the details. These people are quite stubborn. They are worthy of being the elites of the army. They were able to get so much information out of them just by using silver needles." As he mentioned it, there was a little undisguised admiration in his eyes. People who weren't afraid of death deserved the respect they deserved. However, compared to David's indifferent attitude, Victor's expression turned abnormally ugly. He looked at Josiah and said anxiously, "Leader, I'll arrange for you to leave the city now." Shaking his head, Josiah said calmly, 15 minutes. You won't be able to run far. Our soldiers are still in the city. We'll stay in the city and defend it. We'll definitely delay the transfer for our leader. Please trust us, we have to move now." Victor took a few steps forward and said with an anxious expression. Then, he saw that Josiah was deep in thought with a frown on his face. He did not seem to have any intention of looking away. He immediately cast his gaze on Tang En, waving his hand. Tang En rubbed his chin and said, "I don't agree with moving out of the city either." "Calm down, Brother Victor, let me finish. Although I don't understand military strategy, from the information I just heard, the other party has made a lot of preparations to deal with us. It doesn't make sense that they can't take down this small city with few soldiers at the last step. At that time, we'll be surrounded in the wilderness. That's the real danger, isn't it?" But, Victor opened his mouth and looked at Josiah. He lowered his head and sighed. "Then what should we do? Brother Fry and General Fry should be able to realize the other party's purpose soon. Maybe the reinforcements are already on the way. So before that, we'll continue to stay in the city. The terrain here is much more complicated than in the wilderness. If we can't find a corner to hide, it'll take a lot of effort for the other party to find us. That's all I can think of. Brother Victor, you're an expert in war. You should know more about this situation than me. Everything depends on you." "Oh right, Josiah will follow me later. You know, it's not that I don't trust you, but she'll be safer with me." "Okay, then it's settled." As the commander of Josiah's personal guards, Victor was naturally not a coward. After being bored for so many days, he couldn't hold back the fighting spirit in his heart. Now that he heard Tang En admit his ability personally, his heart was instantly ignited with ambition. He felt that his face had increased greatly, and his self-esteem as a Real Guard had also come back. Seeing that Josiah didn't object, he immediately clapped his hands and said decisively, "I'll go and gather the soldiers in the city now. When it comes to street fighting, our Grey Coat Army has never been afraid of anyone. The safety of the leader." After a pause, Victor walked in front of Tang En and suddenly bowed. "Sir Tang En, I'm sorry, I already knew your identity long ago, so I'm only greeting you now. No matter what others say, I, Victor, am convinced by you. The safety of the leader will be in your hands, please." After finishing his words, he bowed deeply. "We're on the same side, there's no need to be so polite." Seeing this, Tang En quickly helped Victor up, and the latter didn't insist. After getting up, he nodded solemnly and strode out of the door. "Wait!" Josiah stretched out his hand and stopped him. "When you gather the soldiers, inform the citizens of the city to stay at home and close their doors and windows. No matter what they hear later, don't go out." "Yes." Watching Victor leave with his head held high and his chest puffed out, Josiah turned his head and looked at Tang En with a faint smile. "You're quite good at inspiring people. Do you want me to find a job for you in the publicity department, Sir Tang En?" He, a flash of inspiration, purely a flash of inspiration. Touching his nose, Tang En said with a cheeky smile. The conversation just now was indeed a performance. It was true that he wasn't good at commanding strategy, but he was definitely a professional expert in escaping. The reason why he said that was actually to find a reason to send Victor and the others away. That way they would have less of a target. Of course, this couldn't be considered a lie. In truth, he was thinking for Victor and the others. Josiah was now a fixed target, and whoever was beside her would face great danger. Although Victor and the others might not care, this was a job they were willing to do. Just like how they risked their lives to block the arrows in Shanghai City. However, from the perspective of Tang En and Josiah, it would be best if fewer people died. "Alright, let's talk about your escape plan." Joshua didn't want to dwell on it any longer. After making a joke, he asked with a serious face. "Two plans." Twain made a V-shaped gesture and said casually, "The first one is very simple. Just find someone in the city who has a similar figure to you and make her disappear. Then I'll be in charge of disguising you as her. And, although this city isn't big, there are at least 100,000 people. Not to mention whether or not they will check us one by one. Even if they want to, they won't have the time to wait for reinforcements. How about that?" This method, it's really simple. When Josiah heard that, she was stunned. She didn't expect such a huge army to be able to escape with such a simple method. It was really very good, very strong. "Of course, why don't you see who is standing in front of you? I'm a professional who has escaped from the north and south of the continent. Do you want to consider it?" Thinking about it, Josiah shook her head. "Let me hear the second plan first. I knew it would be like this. Sooner or later, you will suffer because of your kind personality." Tapping Josiah's forehead, although she didn't say it, Tang En knew that she had rejected the plan. With Tang En's level of disguise, if Josiah really blended into the thousands of people in the city, the other party would absolutely not be able to find him in a short time. But in this way, it was hard to say what kind of choice the other party would make. And, judging from the thousands of people blocking the canyon, it was not impossible for the other party to directly slaughter the city in a fit of anger to look for him. The second plan is a little troublesome and requires a little risk, but actually, I quite like it. Do you still remember the person who talked to me just now? His uncle. How dare he call himself a bad guy in front of me? He is too arrogant. If I don't kill him, I won't be able to live up to my reputation as a top assassin. First, he complained with righteous indignation. Then, turning his head, Tang En suddenly bent down and stretched out his hand. His movements were extremely elegant. Then, "Beautiful lady. Oh, beautiful lady. Whether there is danger or danger ahead, whether it is a bottomless abyss or a dark hell, are you willing to send him to see the God of light with me?" She couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. Then, she bit her lip and took a breath. Josiah's expression became serious. Her solemn face had some kind of sacred ritual. She raised her hand and put it in Tang En's palm. "I do. Well, in the name of an angel, a demon, or any god, I announce that you and I are officially assassin partners. Now I can kiss you." Chapter 9:19. P.S. I personally experienced it. After cutting out the appendix, the immunity will drop for a period of time. Therefore, the civet cat is on 4 again. Fever, just a small fever, definitely won't be able to defeat the civet cat. 15 minutes later, the tall city gate was smashed down by a few thick tree trunks, causing a large cloud of dust to rise. In the next moment, a large group of cavaliers who had been waiting to attack jumped off their horses and brandished their blades. They roared as they charged into the city, and quickly occupied the advantageous strategic positions near the city gate. Then, they looked at the empty space in their field of vision in a daze. They raised their blades, but were unable to swing them down. Not to mention overall strength, just in terms of numbers, the Greycoat army was far from the Bran. This was the actual situation, and there was no room for debate. Hence, the current strategy of the Greycoat army was to attack, using offense as defense. They attacked relentlessly, trying to buy as much time as possible for the upcoming stalemate. Hence, apart from Shanghai City, the other cities that the Greycoat army had occupied, they didn't have any extra troops to defend. Of course, it was impossible that they didn't have any troop. After all, even if they wanted to maintain the stability of the city, they needed to show off fully armed soldiers to intimidate the enemy. Hence, it was abnormal that there weren't any soldiers near the city gate, which was the most important part of the city defense. The horse hooves stepped on the iron city gate, making a crisp sound. Fighting in the streets? Hee, so they really haven't left. They have some guts. Rubbing the hourglass in his hand, Breton glanced at the empty city gate and nodded. He casually waved his hand. Since that's the case, what are we waiting for? Send my orders, charge in, and end the battle in 45 minutes. Yes. This was a simple battle like catching a turtle in a jar. At least, that was how Breton and the others saw it. The moment the order was given, a few high-ranking officers bowed and led their cavalry into the city. They followed the main road and surrounded the four-city region. Let's go, we should enter the city. Although this isn't a challenging battle, it's still a battlefield. We still have to do what we need to do. And where's the tallest building in the city? People who liked to set up plans all had a strong desire to control, and they also had the habit of doing everything by themselves. Breda was no exception. So even though he didn't think that the other party could play any tricks, he still habitually asked about the position that could oversee the entire situation. It's in the Eastern District. There's a 4-story library there, General. Like soldiers. The adjutant seemed to have expected his general to ask such a question as he answered without hesitation. Lead the way. Later, bring the assassins who are still in charge of this city to me. Every bit of strength has its uses, and it must be used. Oh right, tell the soldiers to be more careful, and don't mess up the formation. No matter what method the other party used, since he was able to kill over 100 assassins, he must be really capable. There's no harm in being careful. Before Breda could finish his long-winded explanation, General, the military expert named Fei Qi walked over with a strange expression on his face, carrying a wooden cabinet with a sound transmission formation on it. He wants to talk to you. Him. Slightly stunned, Breton quickly reacted and leaned closer to the wooden cabinet. What's the matter? Oh, it's connected. Hello, Sir Breda. Have you had breakfast? If you haven't, there's a few pieces of bread under the statue in the city square. If you go there early, it should still be warm. Thank you. You already know my name? Stunned, Breda glanced at Fei Qi. The latter shook his head, indicating that it wasn't him who said it. I understand. It's those few captured scouts, right? But at this time, shouldn't you be hiding in some corner of the city, and praying that you won't be found immediately? How dare you talk to me? Or, do you want to surrender? Oh, you better not. This isn't something that can be discussed with a few pieces of bread. I still hope that you can show some courage. Only then will it be interesting, right? Haha, you misunderstand, Sir Breda. An emotionless and rigid voice came from the sound transmission formation. This call is just to inform you that we are waiting for you at the 10-mile alley in the Southern District. Please come quickly. We won't wait for you if you're late. Hearing this, Breda raised his eyebrows. I like the saying the past is not waiting for you. Let me guess, your forces are limited. You know that you can't defend the city, So you only want to defend a small district and fight to the death. Of course, this isn't your real purpose. This is just to attract attention so that your leader has time to escape, right? After saying this, the sound transmission formation was silent for a while. After a while, the other side sighed. You really think too much. Wife, come and say hello. He said you escaped. A female voice interrupted. Ah, Sir Breda, hello. What do I want to say? Whatever. Oh no. This is a king against a king, so it's best to show some dominance. Why didn't you say so earlier? I just asked. Okay, let me think. Listening to the trivial discussion from the sound transmission formation, Breda's mouth twitched. He frowned and was a little confused. He realized that he couldn't see through the other side. This wasn't a good feeling. If there was really a rebel leader among these two people, their relaxed attitude naturally didn't make sense. Did they really have a way to turn the situation around? Or were they pretending to be relaxed? While he was still in doubt, the female voice seemed to have thought of something. She said lightly, General Breda, if you immediately take your people and leave Pia City, I can pretend that you never came. The voice that came out from the sound transmission formation was a little distorted. Coupled with the faint sincerity and compassion in the words, it could be said that the other side of dominance was leaking out. Well done. Clap, it should be a clap. Then, she said, well then, see you later, sayonara. Stunned, Breda wanted to say something, but the other side had obviously hung up the call. Breda slowly straightened his body. His frown didn't disappear. Instead, it became more serious. It seemed that he had some new doubts. General, shall we continue to enter the city? Of course, don't pay attention to him. Just follow our previous plan. Oh right, send someone to the statue in the city square. If the bread is clean, bring it back. After all, it's a token of our appreciation. After a pause, Breda shook his head and looked at the military expert. I still can't figure it out. Fitch, do you know what he meant by sayonara just now? And the first time we talked, he also said a lot of strange words. Could it be a code word? Is there a spy around us? I can't figure it out. It couldn't be helped. People who cared about everything loved to go down a dead end. South City District, 10 Mile Alley. 10 Mile Alley, as the name suggested, was a long alley that was 10 miles long. Of course, the actual length couldn't be so accurate, but from the name, one would know what the terrain was like. Most of the city planning in the other world was terrible. Large cities were better, but some small towns were a little unbearable. Plus, the South City District was synonymous with the slums. So, it was not difficult to understand that there was a messy alley that was more than 10 miles long. Outside the alley, Josiah slowly opened his eyes and pointed to the north. In that direction, about 3 miles away, there were signs of magic waves just now. Tang Yen heard this and looked at David and the others beside him. Hurry up and get rid of the spies in the city as soon as possible. Since they had decided to face the enemy head-on, the first thing to do was to get rid of the spies around them. It was easy to get rid of the spies. Tang Yen was very sensitive to the gazes that fell on him. He could chase after them and kill them, or directly get rid of them. In addition, because of the characteristics of the sound transmission array, another array had to be set up every 3 to 5 miles for transit. In other words, there were fixed surveillance points in many places in the city. This was something that had to be eliminated. Otherwise, no matter how the battle went, the entire city would always be in the enemy's line of sight, and this side would be extremely passive. Fortunately, Josiah was a real sorcerer. The short conversation with Breda just now was enough for her to sense the previous transit point connected to the sound transmission array beside her. Knowing this, it was up to David and the others to extort a confession by torture and follow the clues. It was not difficult to get rid of all the sound transmission arrays in the city. Don't worry, boss. Nodding, David and the others quickly disappeared into the alley in the north. Only Tang En and Josiah were left in the field. Hope everything goes well. Slightly taking a breath, Josiah raised his head and looked at the North District. His eyes flashed with a hint of worry. There are too few soldiers in the city. Victor and the others can't hold on for long. Tang En shrugged. Don't worry, honey. Do you know what kind of people are the dumbest in the world? What kind? It's the kind of people who know that the enemy is an assassin that can't be messed with, but they still take the initiative to come to him. Curling his lips, Tang En narrowed his eyes and looked at the dust rising above the street in the distance. He pulled Josiah's arm and retreated into the complicated alley behind them. Before all the sound transmission arrays in the city were removed, Tang En and Josiah would stay here. In other words, the 10-mile alley was destined to become a sea of blood. Chapter 9:21. The human wave tactic sounded a little shameless, but it was also a very practical tactic. No matter how powerful you were, as long as you fell into the sea of people, you couldn't escape the awkward situation of two fists being outnumbered. Sometimes, being the enemy of 10,000 was just a saying. As long as you were human, you would eventually have limits. This was an objective fact that couldn't be changed. If not, the Bran and the northern wilderness wouldn't have been entangled for so many years. Wouldn't it be better to just send out experts from both sides to compete? Of course, there were always exceptions to everything. If you ambushed an unguarded warrior in an open space, not to mention 10,000 people, even a void-level warrior would have to kneel with just a dozen or so Mjolnir. But if you were an absolute close combat expert in complicated terrain, the result would be very different. The 10-mile alley was narrow and complicated, twisting and turning. In such an environment, a large-scale cavalry charge was naturally useless. Even 2 or 3 people walking side by side would be congested. In order to end the battle quickly, Bretta brought the elite heavy cavalry in the army this time. Helplessly, they could only dismount and enter. Then, before the senior officer who came here had a headache about how to assign each team to search this complicated alley, the cavaliers who had just walked into the alley to scout the terrain discovered the enemy. First, there were a few warning roars, followed by the clashing of weapons, the collapse of heavy objects, and the faint screams of pain. It was chaos. Hit the jackpot? The senior officer couldn't help but be stunned. This was the first thought that flashed through his mind. Previously, when Tang En heartlessly told them the address, Bretta and the others didn't believe it at all. But since it was still a piece of information, they still sent someone to inform the senior officer who was searching here and asked him to be careful to avoid falling into the enemy's trap. They didn't expect to actually hit the jackpot. Sir, it's that woman, it's the rebel leader. While they were in a daze, a soldier retreated from the alley in the distance and shouted. Now, Josiah also enjoyed the same treatment as Tang En. His wanted portrait was hung in every town and farm in the north of Bran. It could be said that he became famous overnight. This time, the soldiers of the Tiger Roar Legion naturally knew him. Are you sure? Yes, we saw it with our own eyes. Haha, I can't believe I've gotten such a great merit. The senior officer was not surprised. Instead, he was overjoyed. He raised his head and laughed excitedly. Right now, the Grey Coat Army was a huge threat to the Bran. If they could kill or capture Josiah, the leader of the rebel army, their contribution would not be any less than fighting to the death with the barbarians in the northern wilderness. In fact, it might even be better. How could the high-ranking officer not be happy about this? He didn't have time to divide the area, so he hurriedly waved his hand. Hurry, charge in. Whoever is the first to kill, capture him alive, I will reward him handsomely. Capturing Josiah alive could affect hundreds of thousands of Grey Coat Army soldiers, so the merit would naturally be greater. The ambition of the high-ranking military officer, who felt that he had a 90% chance of winning, instantly soared. Unfortunately, it was good to have ideas, but reality never respected people. Although the name of the 10-mile alley was like that, it was obviously not a complete 10-mile alley inside. There was no point in building it like that. There were residential houses inside, and there were even a few narrow streets. However, compared to these, there were more complicated alleys, which was how it got its name. At the corner of the street, seeing a small group of soldiers in heavy cavalry armor hurriedly running past, Tang En and Josiah walked out from the corner side by side. They had no intention of hiding and were not in a hurry. They raised their heads and looked at the drying racks on the eaves of the houses on both sides of the street. All kinds of clothes of different colors were hung in a disorderly manner. When the wind blew, they fluttered together. The whole scene did not look like they were being hunted at all, but more like they were taking a stroll after a meal. Where was I just now? Oh, Wu Ding. After all, he is the sword god. I tricked him a while ago, so I have to pay the price. Therefore, I can't stay here for long. I need to personally make a trip to the capital in the south. I was born to be busy. Well, I originally wanted to kill for a few more days and do my best to intimidate those assassins until I return from the south. Now, I can use this opportunity to get it done once and for all. Be mentally prepared. I am going to start a massacre in a while, and it will be very brutal. Alright, put up your magic shield first. Don't misunderstand, it's not that it can't be solved. Didn't you just buy these clothes a few days ago? I can protect you when we fight later, but I can't guarantee that you won't be stained with blood or anything. It won't look good then. You're fooling around again. Glancing at Tang En, who shrugged and was bursting with confidence, Josiah raised her hand and made a mysterious gesture. She muttered a few vague incantations in a low voice, and a circle of white light shield quickly lit up around her delicate body, emitting a faint chill. This was the essential skill of a mid-level spellcaster, magic shield. Josiah was very talented in ice magic, and had advanced to become an official mid-level spellcaster 2 years ago. However, after she became the leader of the Grey Coat Army, she was entangled with many things, and her cultivation stagnated. Until now, she was still a mid-level spellcaster. However, there were gains and losses. With her current status, her strength and cultivation were of little value, so there was no need to worry about it. After putting up the magic shield, Josiah did not stop waving her hand and continued to mutter something in a low voice. After a while, when faint traces of sweat appeared on their foreheads, water vapor gradually rose from the surrounding streets and shrouded them in a thin layer of mist, causing the figures of the 2 people in it to be slightly indistinct. At this time, the sun had already risen from the east. Although the light was dim, there would not be morning mist at this time. Naturally, it could only be the effect of magic. There is no need to do this, trust me. Tang En looked around at the true mist and immediately understood Josiah's intention. She wanted to create a better battle environment for him. It's good to be able to help a little. At least, I don't have to feel so burdensome. Sticking out her tongue, Josiah wiped the sweat on her forehead and said with a smile, I accept your kindness, but… Touching his nose, Tang En narrowed his eyes and looked at the corner of the street more than 10 feet away. Isn't it a little strange that there is mist at this time? Josiah did not have many opportunities to fight with others, and after becoming the leader, it was naturally even rarer. Hearing this, she was stunned at first and then immediately reacted. It seemed that she had done something bad with good intentions. Strange, where is the mist coming from at this time? As if confirming Tang En's words, a small group of more than 10 soldiers turned out from the corner of the street. The person in the lead turned his head to look at the surrounding mist and asked in puzzlement. Looking forward again, she immediately stopped in her tracks and stared blankly at the 2 people standing side by side in the mist. For a moment, she could not see clearly whether they were enemies or ordinary people. She opened her mouth. Hey! Just as she put on a vigilant posture, her vision blurred and the mist in her vision quickly separated to two sides. A ghostly figure flashed in front of her in an instant. "Didn't your mother teach you?" A palm pressed on the helmet of the captain, and with a bang, his body fell backward and instantly knocked down several soldiers behind him. "Be careful!" The warning came late, and the few people beside him were shocked when they saw it. Just as they were about to raise their swords and slash, Tang En, who was rushing over, waved his hand. A slanted blade light accurately cut through the gap between the breastplate and the helmet of a soldier. Disturbing other people's date. Stepping forward, several blade lights flashed wildly in succession. This time, it was not limited to the neck, but casually splashed on the faces of the surrounding soldiers who were still standing around. Between the eyebrows, eyes, and mouths that were wide open in shock. At the same time, with a few steps, the solid armor of the fallen soldiers was like a layer of thin paper. It was deflated when touched and cracked when stepped on. It was completely vulnerable. Is this a very impolite behavior? It was said that as long as the blade was drawn fast enough, there would only be a pleasant sound in the wind. And if the blade was drawn back fast enough, there would not be a trace of blood spilled in a short time. Tang En should have reached this level, because when he finished his short sentence and turned around to leave, the soldiers who were lying or standing behind him were like statues. They were silent and motionless, and no one spoke. Although it was only a moment, in the blink of an eye, and no blood spilled, Josiah already knew that they were dead. When Tang En walked in front of them slowly, clang, clang, the standing soldiers were still standing, but the weapons in their hands fell to the ground one after another, and the sound was endless. "Hey," I said, "this time it will be very cruel. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."